Okay, this is episode 7 of OverSight. I'm the usual host, Thorin. Watchy Crystal here, basically being on every episode. Let's see. Actually, do you think one day you will no longer be a talk show co-host? Do you think it could ever happen?
If I stopped casting, yes, probably. I would no longer be a talk show co-host. I think that maybe in the long span of my career, I may give over to the dark side at some point and retreat from the public limelight and go into the business end of esports or the management end, but not anytime soon.
Okay. I mean, what would prompt that though? Is there some sort of like a ratio of like the amount of money that would be needed to offset the narcissism of needing to be a public figure and loved and have your opinions heard?
You see, it's not about loved, as most of the time it's
True.
really
Yeah,
annoying.
okay.
It's really annoying to be in the public, and I don't think that I'm a figure that generates overwhelming amounts of love. It's pretty equal between the love and hate I receive. And I think that there may be a certain point where I feel that I can do more for the esports scene from behind the scenes than in front of it, because it obviously takes a lot of time and effort to be caught up in the details of all the games that go on and really have your finger on the pulse of the competitive scene, as opposed to a larger picture of steering the direction of an industry. So.
Yeah. I mean, I remember it was something similar happened in League of Legends like a couple of years ago. You were telling me like, maybe one day though, I feel like I can do more for the industry and do better for players, if I'm actually an owner. And then you started going down that road, you had this Renegades organization, and then it was getting a bit out of control, because you were casting like too many days a week, you were doing that. And so, I mean, I had to go ahead and like actually contact Riot secretly as an anonymous source and tell them a few things that I'd heard, and it's all taken care of now, Monty. You're in a new game, we're all safe. We've got a new show, and this time it's going to go the whole distance. So
that's right. See, you actually saved me from walking that path, right? You couldn't give up our shows together, Duncan.
No.
It was too precious to you. You had to sabotage that.
If I can't have you, then nobody can.
You enjoyed this time we spent together far too much.
Absolutely. So our guest for this episode, Monty, is actually the first time we've ever had anyone who was a guest on this show who lived within 100 miles of where I live in England, actually, because Sideshow actually lives in the same region that I do when I'm in the UK. And he was someone who I actually found out about you, not just from the initial stuff you've done in Overwatch, but because when I first came into Overwatch, I actually just thought to myself, since there's a lot of crossover, I've noticed a lot of people come from League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Quake, other esports games before, and Overwatch is their first big esports game. I actually just put a tweet out and I basically said, can people give me recommendations on people from games like Team Fortress 2, where they have some sort of, like a lineal connection to what Overwatch is, as to who like I could talk to or who I should look out for to get some insight into the game. And you were one of the people listed. And I looked you up. And so how would you describe what you did in Team Fortress 2, Sideshow?
In TF2, because it's such a small scene, there's essentially one organization that does everything within the scene. And I was initially a player, went on to do some casting just because they were desperate for casters. I was the only person who had decent English and played at like a top level. Did that for a while, enjoyed it, and then because I was in love with the game, everybody in that community is in love with the game. It's like a sick disease. And then just went into organizing tournaments or streaming or just whatever I could do, essentially, to try and further the game. Organize LAN tournaments, try to boost up organizations, get in touch with sponsors. So a huge range of things, but at a very small kind of grassroots level.
Because I saw in your Twitter profile that it does say, even though, Overwatch is a huge game now, mate, you could just make the whole description about Overwatch and just put in like but you do have there former TF2 expert.
That's
now,
the one.
That's dangerous words, mate, if you put that in there. So does that actually mean you are one of the most knowledgeable people about Team Fortress 2?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like I've done I played at a pretty high level. I was at one point in the second best European team. I was the worst player on the team, but I was very much a team player. I was like, had built the team, etc. So they allowed me to go on there. But from an analytical point of view, I spent a lot of time thinking about the game. I was looking at other people's esports content that they were bringing out for stuff like CSGO, obviously your own work and Monty's work when you're talking about that stuff, Richard Lewis, and try to apply that in a sense to TF2 and thinking about it from a more analytical point of view. Of course, there's other people that are other great analysts within the scene as well, but yeah, I definitely put myself up there. I've done like they do the World Championships every year, so I've done them for the past 2 and a bit years. So yeah, I'm up there in TF2, but that doesn't actually mean much in terms of the grander scheme of things, because as I said, it's an incredibly small scene.
Okay, so he's trying to be humble there, Monty. He's like, yeah, well, I mean, I was kind of like a big deal in TF2, but, you know, in Overwatch, you know, I'm just starting out. I'm trying to learn from people. But you got to go the other way, right, Monty? You got to come into the new game like, I was the shit. I'm going to be the shit again. And you guys just don't know yet that I'm the best, basically. I'm just waiting to become what I will become. That's the approach you take, right, Monty?
And of course, because you can also take the elitism route from already having that expertise in another game. Right, and knowing a large number, no doubt, of the players, which is one of the reasons why it's going to be so interesting to have you on the show and discuss a lot of these players' backgrounds to help flesh out, I think, people's history about TF2, because I can tell you right now that I know really fucking nothing about it, so I'm very interested myself.
Same as most people. I mean, if most of the player base, at least most of the top players, hadn't transitioned over to Overwatch, again, nobody would be interested, right? It's because these players have transitioned over to a bigger title, and they have also kept quite a number of the storylines going, and they obviously have the same personalities in the way that they play, a lot of them as well.
Okay. So,
well, I think that's one of the most exciting things. We've talked about this on the show many times, but Overwatch being the great melting pot esport that picked up, sort of rolled around and picked up a bunch of pros or semi-pros from MOBAs, from other FPS, so even failed pros from LoL, or pros past their prime in League of Legends, or pros who wanted to change to try and be dominant in a different game, at least from some of the Korean League pros standpoint that have moved over, like Luna and Gamsu. And then you also have failed Counter-Strike guys, or maybe even banned Counter-Strike guys. Exactly. I was going to say, I think the iBuyPower guys are trying to make a stab at the old Overwatch scene these days, and I hope they do well. I think they learned their lesson, and Valve was way too brutal for their punishment. I think that's kind of ridiculous, honestly. And then you have TF2, and you have Tribes. And the other exciting thing is that this is the first time we've ever really had a global FPS, because in the past, when CSGO has been, or CS has been big in the West in general, it's been a variety of different shooters in Asia that have been played. So we didn't really have the Asian market up at the same level of involvement as the Western world. They've been split between different titles for a long time, with only minimal overlap due to a lack of popularity. But now, with how popular it is in Korea and China, as well as the West, we're getting into a space where we actually have a great global FPS, which is really exciting.
You know how much that tickles me as well, Monty, that, you know, because people knew when I was in CS that, I mean, we're talking about even like half a decade ago, I'd already I used to follow Brood War, and I'd followed League of Legends, obviously, when it got going really heavily, like Season 2, Season 3. People used to always tell me in Counter-Strike, like, because people would often ask us a question like, what would you change about the scene? And so one answer I always used to say is, I wish every country went really hardcore at Counter-Strike. Like, I'd love to know if there's some like amazing Chinese player, you know, who would be as good as the best Counter-Strike player. And the idea is, obviously, you add in millions of Chinese people, you add in Korean team houses and stuff, and I know from those games, like, okay, whether they'd be the best or not, maybe you could debate that, but there would definitely be good players and there'd be good teams, okay? And everyone told me, no, you don't understand, Thorin, like, it'd never be that way, like, they'll never be that good. You have to understand, like, because you have to realize, I'll break it down like this for you, Monty. Unless someone's really followed Brood War, it's probably the worst example of a game that you could show an FPS person and go, oh, it's a really skilled game. They'll go, you mean that little dude I'm like moving around, and I make a box over some dudes, and I give them a command, and the AI moves them across the screen. Like, that doesn't translate very well as something that's really skilled, right? So they think that you're playing like fucking like Age of Empires single player or something when they see you playing a game that, like, or they think it's like some sort of like Civilization game or something, and you're like, no, it's really skilled, like, it's very, very hard. So the problem is they all thought like, you're just really overhyping Koreans. You don't understand, like, their brains work good in like RTS games and stuff, but it'd never work in FPS games. And obviously now in Overwatch, the Koreans basically are already the best.
I mean, how many times have we heard this fucking story, Duncan? It just tilts me to no end. So when League of Legends started, one of the reasons why I moved to Korea was because I was sure the Koreans were going to kick everybody's ass. And remember, I moved right at the end of season 2 after Frost had lost the World Championship finals. And yes, we'd already started to see some Korean dominance, obviously, that year when I was living in New York, and Blaze had come and beaten the West pretty handily, but it was still a relatively small tournament. But people, I mean, you remember all those great double lift quotes saying, like, the Koreans are a year behind and never going to catch up. But I remember from following League of Legends esports from its...
Oh, no, wait a second, Monty. I just need to clarify that quote because it's better than that. His quote was that they'll always be a year behind, which is in some ways the most genius concept I've ever heard, because double lift doesn't understand the concept that you can even like learn from other people's experiences. And you can, like, by his logic, he will always be like whatever 18 years behind in knowledge of his own parents or something. I don't know what his logic was.
by his logic, every generation of humanity has to reinvent the Pythagorean theorem, right?
Yeah.
It's always an individual journey.
That's why the thing is, it's not just like an ill thought out quote. It's actually just like genius in how stupid it is.
Funny.
It is incredible though how many fans still believe the narrative that the Koreans are worse at mechanical skill but better at teamwork, and you see that,
dude.
Like, being pushed all the time.
Slasher told me. I remember talking to Slasher in beta when I was sitting in Korea, and Slasher told me straight up that Koreans can't aim, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, dude, the second most played game for the entire time I've been in Korea is a shitty CS:GO clone called Sudden Attack. They play FPSs. They play a game called what is it? Black Squad as well. And they have a bunch of Korean-made FPSs that are played, and they've been played on OGN, and you just never see it because it's obviously not broadcast in English because nobody gives a fuck. But there have been very big tournaments I've been to Sudden Attack finals in Korea that have had 4,000 live spectators. So it's not really that inconceivable that this would happen. So, but back to League. So in the early days of League, of course, the Koreans were only really known for RTS play. We're talking Warcraft 3 and StarCraft Brood War primarily. Duncan will throw in some examples from CS that he likes to discuss as well. But those were outliers for sure within Korea. Yeah. But everybody was saying, well, they never really played, because Dota was really big in Southeast Asia. And for the most part, if Koreans were playing Warcraft 3, they were playing the actual Warcraft 3 1v1 game, right? They weren't playing the mods. So they said, oh, no, this is a team game. These were the excuses. First off, if you know anything about Korean culture, you should know that they would probably do even better in a team game because they are very much focused around teamwork, and they're not very individualistic culturally. But they were saying, oh, no, it's a team game. They can't do that. And they've never played Dota. And look at how big it was in Southeast Asia. Those are going to be the big teams that come in, the Koreans, whatever. And I saw the same exact thing in Overwatch. People saying, oh, the Koreans can't aim. They're not good at the FPS. The West will be dominant forever. Look at Counter-Strike. I'm like, yeah, but the Koreans don't play. They don't give a shit about Counter-Strike. I mean, Steam isn't even installed on PC Bong computers. If you want to play CS:GO, you have to go to the PC Bong, install Steam, install Counter-Strike, and there aren't even servers in Korea. So
the mad thing about that comparison as well is that the aiming styles in Counter-Strike is so different to the aiming style in a game like Overwatch or TF2 as well, where it's a really low time to kill in CS, and it's a lot about anticipating where people are coming, having excellent crosshair placement, great reactions to people coming through. Like, those are just not skills that apply to anywhere near the same level in games like
imagine
Overwatch
if one bullet from Soldier's Gun killed you.
Yeah, it'd be insane. Like, it would
be a pretty different game, right?
I don't think people talk about time to kill enough in terms of how it affects games, because it's a huge thing. Like in TF2 and Overwatch, like, time to kill essentially defines how important choke points are and like the position that you take in maps from like a game-to-game point of view. It doesn't compare like map to map, obviously, because it's just based on the inherent like the concept of the game.
But I mean, it gives you like a sense of what a good time to get the kill within is, and whether you're going to be able to replenish your supplies of people who are there, etc. Right?
Yeah. And just in terms of whether or not you can take a fight through a choke point, or whether you can take too much damage and then going to have like a health disadvantage, like the fact that you need a Reinhardt because you're going through a choke point and you've got like this speed and the damage is coming in at this rate. It has a huge effect on how games are played.
Okay, so I've got a question for you because this is something I actually wanted to know. This is why I wanted to get someone from TF2 on the show. Is obviously there have been a lot of TF2 people who've transitioned over, and in fact, a lot of them early on were among the better players. So it seems like for whatever reason they had the basis or the concepts of how to play the game. And sure, now a lot of other people have caught up, and there's a lot of people like Overwatch only that are among the best in the world. You know, obviously Koreans are a good example, but what are actually the similarities between TF2 and Overwatch? Like, obviously, we don't want to, like, it's not, you can't just crowbar it in like it's just TF2 reskinned with anime, stupid fantasy characters. But what are the similarities? What are the concepts that cross over, do you think?
For starters, the game types are fairly similar with TF2 compared to other games as well. So you've got capture points, and the concept of working around ultimates and trying to time them and see what the other team's got is similar in some senses to what TF2 had in an Uber charge, but that was incredibly central to the gameplay. It was more like football with like a single football than Overwatch is. Overwatch has got 6 up for either team or variations of that, and you can't quite time them because it's dependent on how much damage they've done, which is difficult to be able to tell.
Hold on. Just for the people who don't know TF2, because we're going to have a lot of them that watch this show, explain what an Uber charge is.
Okay, so the way the TF2 was played was it was 6v6, so there's another similarity with Overwatch in a sense, but it doesn't make that much difference. And you had a limit of 1 medic per team, so that was your only healer class. And once he's built that up from just passive healing, so
his ult.
It was like his ult essentially.
It was like his ult, yeah, okay.
But you didn't build it up by just healing, as you would in, for example, with Mercy. You would build it up passively by just having it locked onto somebody, and you would just like have it ticked up because you're constantly replenishing like their maximum health.
Okay.
So, and that was timed so that if you could build it as efficiently as possible, that would happen in 41 seconds. And the average was 55 seconds because people weren't under a certain amount of health. So you could time it a little bit like you would if you were playing Quake or something like that. You would have people where they know exactly when the enemy's going to have their ultimate. They know when they've got their ultimate. So that affects a lot of when you're able to engage through choke points. Because that then makes you invulnerable, and you can take a fight through a choke because you're not going to take a huge amount of damage, because obviously when you go through a choke point, your movement and your positioning is incredibly predictable, and they just shoot at this tiny little area, and you're going to eat all of that damage as you come through it. So that was how it worked in TF2. When you go into Overwatch, you have the same kind of choke point principles, as all of the maps consist of small choke points or large choke points, where a lot of your team is going to form around there. The concept of holding from high grounds and having like play, attacking people and moving through areas was similar in a sense. You had attack defend maps in TF2 as well as payload, but nobody played that competitively, but people were aware of what it was and what some of the strategies would be around it. But I think one of the things about TF2 that helped a lot of people get to grips with Overwatch was that people played a ton of TF2. Like, I remember actually watching one of your Apex casts really early on, and you were talking about a Korean guy that had 3,000 hours in TF2, and you're like, so he's obviously got some like solid FPS experience. And I was sat there like, man, if only he knew. Like, most of the top players have like 10K hours in TF2. It's mad.
Well, it's unusual. I believe you, of course, but it's unusual for a Korean Taimou, I think, is who we're talking about. And the coach for Africa. But for a Korean player, again, Steam is not installed on PC bugs. So for a Korean player to have that many hours logged on TF2 is unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. But people put an inordinate amount of time into the game, and the people, because there was no incentive to actually get incredibly good and dominate the game, people would swap from hero to hero a lot within TF2. They're called classes, but whatever. Sure. So you would have one that was very specialized in like hit scan and being able to dodge around, one that's really specialized in rockets, and just that's essentially the whole class is rockets and rocket jumping and perfecting that. And then you would have another one which is all about projectiles and being able to move around and lock off chokes. And people would just master these classes because they had nothing better to do. There was no point at dominating the game. So they had a good sense of being able to approach games from a lot of different angles and weren't afraid to try loads of different things and try and grind out heroes really early on in the game. So I think that gave them an early advantage in the game, like their approach to it, some of the concepts that they took across, but also the way that they would just kind of try and grind out heroes until they were good at them.
Okay, so obviously one massive difference with Overwatch though is that instead of having just like a few classes, essentially every character, sure, we call them like classes like offense and stuff, but in reality every character is so different from the other ones in a broad sense, you know, and like if you think about, there's nothing comparable to like Winston, right, in TF2.
No.
So you have these really extreme ones, and obviously that has been a huge part of Overwatch, because then you get the element that comes from MOBAs where balancing that is super hard, because it's the interaction of like, you know, 20 different things at once, and if you change one little factor, then suddenly something else isn't played and something else is super overpowered. Like how was getting to grips with that when you came into Overwatch?
That was completely new for me because I'd never played MOBAs. A number of the TF2 guys had played MOBAs at like, not at a high level, but they were familiar with the concepts and like how the interactions would work out. I think in a lot of ways, from my point of view, having not really interacted with MOBAs that much other than occasionally watching them, it seems far less complex because you don't have the items as a point. You don't have such a range of abilities on certain heroes. They're kind of locked down, so you know what is going to be coming at you whenever you see a particular hero. They don't have different stats depending on what time of the game it is, or they don't have different items that can change what their interaction with you is going to be. But so I think one of the more difficult things with Overwatch is just that you can switch, right, compared to a MOBA where you have to lock it in beforehand. So you have to be able to adapt all the time. But I think there's a lot of complexity, but it comes down to the calling structure within teams as well, and how they deal with that kind of stuff. And we always had a lot of really good callers, and some of them continue to be in the best teams. But I don't know. It was definitely a different interaction compared to TF2. You're right. Okay. It was a different interaction compared to a lot of games. Like I don't think any game had properly blended the FPS and abilities in a class-based FPS before. It was just a new thing.
Well, we're going to see it soon with the new Quake Champions game, it seems, as well, to a certain degree. How does that make... By the way, just by the way, how does that make you feel, Duncan, as a Quake enthusiast, that they're taking the game design that way?
I mean, I actually made a video on this topic, which will be in the top right-hand corner now. It probably won't be, by the way, because if you've ever watched my videos, I don't ever go back and watch them again, so I always forget to put those fucking annotations. And there's always just people in the comments like, please, which video? Which video is he talking? And I never link it, so who gives a fuck, right? But I did a video on this. The basic problem with that premise, okay, Monty, is that...
When did you do a video on Quake stuff?
When they announced Quake Champions, they announced the premise. So I assume at QuakeCon,
Have you seen the release video of the first?
I think I watched a teaser or something. But no, the big problem, I can surmise it quite simply, which is Quake is, because it was like the grandfather FPS game, you know, it was like before Counter-Strike, before StarCraft 2, before League of Legends, obviously. The problem is Quake has always been the game that was struck by the thinking of like, we used to be number one. Now someone else is number one. What do we have to do to get back on top? Which is like, that thinking alone needs to be destroyed because it doesn't make sense. Because the problem is, when Quake was number one, there almost was no other game. So I always made this point to people. Like, you have to understand, it's not that Counter-Strike came along and you could switch something about Quake to make it as popular as Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike appealed to different people. Like, if Counter-Strike had existed when Quake existed, someone might have just played Counter-Strike instead. But since there was only Quake, they didn't have a choice, did they? So they were sort of forced to play the game. And in that sense, we've sort of inflated the numbers beyond people who just like what Quake represents. And then the other factor is that these other games have way more casual appeal. So, for example, when Quake was number one, maybe, I mean, I'll have to throw a number out here, but let's say 10,000 people were playing it online. The difference is, you might still be able to get to 10,000 people playing Quake Live or something now. But obviously, MOBA games have millions of people playing. Even Counter-Strike 1.6 at one point in time probably had like 1 million in its heyday or something, you know. The point there is, it's not even the same people. It's not like you're trying to win back the same guy. That same guy might still be playing your game. So the big problem with the concept of Quake Champions is it's a game designed for nobody. Because someone who's a hardcore Quake player
so
likes
true.
really hardcore games that are hard to play and really difficult to master. And the whole point of you being equal within the game is then only your skill manifests. So that kind of guy will hate Quake Champions. It has nothing that he likes. Now, they think naively, that doesn't matter, we're going to tap into the casual base. Well, no, you're not, are you? Because if it's going to have anything to do with Quake, it's going to at least have some component of the more hardcore aspect, which means, therefore, you're in this crazy middle ground where no one is, where the casual people are already just going to play MOBA games in Overwatch. Why would they play your game? And then the hardcore people. So you've actually designed a game that's a Quake game, not for Quake people and not for people who don't like Quake. So it's actually a genius concept. That's like the premise I come to, in a way. It's the ultimate example of a game designed by committee as far as I can tell, Monty, because they're like, well, people like games with class-based systems. Yeah, they do, you're right. But we still got to keep it Quake. Yeah, but do people like that in Quake? Never mind, it's going out like that. I don't know what the premise is, quite frankly, But I don't blame them, because here's the thing, you have to realize. We're all going to find out
together, because the closed beta, I think, is happening really, a week or something. So I'm curious, at the very least. I agree with you. I don't really know what it's going to do, but...
No. I mean, I'm sure people will give it a try, like some people, but the other problem it has is if you understand the development history, then you'd also see why there's not really a chance for it to do very well. Because the reason why Quake games also never became, essentially... In a weird way, games like Quake and Counter-Strike could have actually taken esports 10 years into the future if someone had known the concept of what esports could become. But because the developers paid no attention and didn't do anything to develop features and spectator features and develop the actual esports side and provide infrastructure and tournament, because they didn't do that, that all had to happen at an organic rate, where it was way slower and it was based on people's own self-interest in these esports companies. And so one of the flaws in that kind of sense is that the reason why it never happened with Quake is because Quake wasn't actually even intended to be a multiplayer game. When they made Doom and Quake, those were single player games which happened to have a multiplayer feature. Now what you did is you basically made the single player game, and at the end you just added functionality for multiplayer people. So for example, famously in Quake World, one of the best maps is actually a game from the single player campaign, and we just play on that map. But when you play it in multiplayer, it doesn't have all the monsters on. It's just empty, So believe it or not, we're using a weird Frankenstein version of the game almost, because it was never designed, for example, on that map to be an amazing 4v4 map. No one even thought it through. So what happened is, the people who developed Quake, id Software, were just making good single-player games. That was their mission, And then on the side, if people want to get together and play the multiplayer, cool, that's like a novelty, It's a gimmick on the side.
Same thing with Brood War, right?
Sure, exactly. And so the problem here, though, is that as a result, I think to this day, id doesn't really understand the concept of esports. They still think of themselves as for example, I think even up until the 2010s, I think they still were one of those companies that, maybe had 40 employees or something, and literally is just in some building in Texas, So they've never really attempted to do the sort of thing you have to do to be esports, which is you got to scale it out. You got to have an esports division only. You got to really make that its own entity that's trying to do something for 10 years. We're way behind the times on that. So unfortunately, if you add that into the stuff I told you about, the premise doesn't really work. I think at best it could be a novelty game that's has limited appeal, It actually reminds me of when Blizzard themselves tried to make Heroes of the Storm, because that's an example there of the same thing. They were well, these MOBA games are big. It's like I literally imagine people around a fucking desk when this goes on, and obviously they're all 48 years old, and they're all I used to play Donkey Kong. I love games. Me and my son play on the iPad. That sort of a guy is sat around. Benson, come on in. It's always Benson. Come on in, Benson. Right, Benson here comes from the esports cyber gaming world, and he's going to tell us about ideas for this new game. And he's like, well, people do like MOBA games. Okay, MOBA games. Start thinking, guys. I want a MOBA game idea in here. But we are Blizzard. We got to retain that Blizzard appeal, right? Yes, we are Blizzard. And we do things the Blizzard way. So we're going to do it differently. We're going to make a game where it's a MOBA game. And you know what? Here's the twist. No one carries. Everyone on the team gets shared abilities. That's like a concept. Yeah, that's like a concept where it's you have failed to identify what every MOBA casual player in the world is like. They are all egomaniacs who want to carry the whole game and be in control only of their own decisions, and they want everyone's teammates to be shit and not have to communicate with them. You have failed again to find an audience.
That's what I love about this, and I've complained about this about Heroes before, is that because nobody can snowball the game, which you could okay, we could get this into Overwatch too, where you don't have the level system or anything like that,
Sure,
or
yeah.
items or anything that you use to snowball the game in traditional MOBAs from an individual carrying perspective. But to use a sports analogy, which is admittedly somewhat ham-fisted, but we'll use it anyway. It would be like applying weights to Michael Jordan's legs so he can't jump so fucking high to carry the Bulls, right? It's like, stop doing that. If a player is good enough to do that, we want to see that level of individual talent. Certainly there's something I enjoy team games, but I also enjoy seeing a level of individual talent that's able to shine, those superstar players. And I feel that Heroes, not to say that you can't be a star Heroes player, but they make it so fucking hard, man. They really do.
But like, that's another game for me where I actually, even when that was in beta, I was like, this will fail. Like, because again, you have sort of you've tried to jump from one game to the other, and you have fallen into the river in between, and you are drowning. Like, you didn't stay on one side, so you're not back in the home village. Okay. You didn't get over to the other, so you can't make a new civilization. You're drowning.
And this comes from me, who's been a giant Blizzard fan my whole life. I started playing Blizzard games with Warcraft 1. And I played every Blizzard title since then. And I was, of course, started my casting career in Warcraft 3, loved watching Brood War. I enjoy a lot of the aesthetic of Diablo and StarCraft and the way that the games look. But I don't want to play a MOBA where you jam all of your fucking titles into one game. It just seems tacky. I don't give a shit about playing Diablo in Heroes of the Storm. I would rather have a unique intellectual property that has a cohesive aesthetic to it, rather than you slamming all your properties together, because it's just fan service. It's gross.
Okay, so anyway, TF2 Sideshow. Remember that game? So actually, I have a question for you. Okay, so of the players who play an Overwatch now at a pro level, which of them was the best at TF2? Who would you pick?
It's almost like asking who the best player in Overwatch is. There's so many different roles that it would be.
Okay, so in the process of answering it, start to put it together. Yeah. Like, where would you start, and where would you branch out to?
So I'd start by highlighting Nox, who currently plays support for Rogue, or plays tank for Rogue now. Actually, he's just made the move over, hasn't he? So he was always one of the most. One of the guys who understood the game best. He has a very thick French accent and isn't great at articulating that to other English-speaking people on his team, but his calls within TF2 and presumably within Overwatch as well, because I think he has a fairly heavy role in how Rogue functions, and did function as well before they made the roster swaps. So he understands games intuitively, and that carried him to a huge amount of victories within TF2. He was often partnered with Numlocked as well, who was excellent in that role, both in terms of hype, focus call, shot calling, and his prowess on the particular role that he played. Some other people to highlight would be the ones that had the high mechanical skill as well. So if you move away from like the shot calling aspect, Zebasai is another one actually that kind of bridges the gap between them both. Who currently plays Flex for Misfits, obviously. He was always second place in European TF2, but played for a huge amount of time and had a slightly different take on how to play the game, but always had his own vision and always knew what he wanted to do with the team. And I've talked to him quite a lot with his former team before they actually made the full Swedish lineup. I haven't got in touch with him recently, but when he was playing on the mixed roster with Misfits, he had very much that kind of role within the team as well. He would be picking the pieces and putting them together. He had some great talent on that team. You've got, but you've also got quite powerful personalities, and I think he was somebody who really helped tie them together and have both a cohesive plan and the in-game calling. And in TF2, he also had excellent mechanical prowess. On a range of heroes as well. He was one of the people who could play almost anything that you put him on to a super high level. And he's translated that across to Overwatch pretty well. He plays the flex. He's got a fairly deep hero pool. The heroes that he does play are pretty good. And he can go back to shot calling from the Lucio point of view. I think they're actually experimenting with some role changes as well within Misfits, so it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Who else? Oh, the FaZe guys as well have always been really high mechanical players, particularly people like Shadowburn and Mike, their new addition to the team, have been two of the players that would instantly jump to any TF2 fan's mind as some of the most mechanically gifted players, and the people who put in the most time just purely grinding to get to that level. Like, they used to put in inordinate amounts of time just playing 1v1 like custom modes within TF2, just again and again and again and again to make sure that they hone that mechanical prowess. And more so with Shadowburn, who actually was more like that in TF2 as well, purely focused on the mechanics, never got to quite the highest level that he could have done because he didn't have the same understanding of the game, and also the fact that he spoke Russian and couldn't really travel over hindered him in those sentences as well. But he has honed his mechanics, obviously, on Genji to an excellent level, and his scan is actually really good as well. Mike is somebody that has taken a long gap from Overwatch. He went in right at the beginning with this G2 team, which had Flippy, Tech, Numlocked, Nox, Mike, and was it Forsaken or Shadowburn? I can't remember. But anyway, that was like a TF2 all-star team, and they've now broken up and they're split across European Overwatch. But then he took a long gap for a while. He was doing his degree in psychology, and now he's come back into the game. So I expect to see him have that similar kind of style where he just kind of grinds until he's actually really good at particular heroes. Who else? Over on the North American side, people like the initial North American mix-up team when they first made that then transitioned to LG and then NRG and had all of these problems towards the later end. But you definitely saw when they first got into the scene that they are players who instantly get a feel for how a game works and are able to communicate very effectively to try and execute that kind of plan. And they're now getting Hablu back onto the team as well, and those are some of the best players from the North American side. Let me think, is there anybody else? I mean, over in the Asian side, it was always a super tiny, mysterious scene. Didn't really know anything about it. Used to occasionally, like, the most you would ever see of Korean or Asian TF2 was frag clips that would pop out, and you would be like, how is he hitting these shots? What is going on? And that would be people like Pine and like Flower. Yeah. So that's the only experience I have of seeing those. The actual level of their play from a team point of view, whenever you watch their games, was fairly shockingly bad, actually. But the individual talent on their team was always was definitely there, and that has apparently ported across and more for Overwatch.
Okay. Monty, what do you actually think of Shadowburn then? Because it seems like the problem is he gets a lot of praise, but this scenario where he just keeps playing from Russia online and you have to wait God knows how long till there's a LAN, just ruins the hype for me, you know.
That's the whole thing about Shadowburn is you asked my opinion, and I think that when I was at Vegas and casting him on LAN, he was performing very well. But again, the problem is how many tournaments is he competing in that I watch him that he has 200 ping. So I think the jury's going to be out on Shadowburn until Overwatch League starts and he can get a stable team and then you live in a local vicinity with that team, and we can see more land-based competition. It's hard to get a read on him for sure.
The other thing about that team as well is that the whole of FaZe is very dysfunctional. Like the entire team seems like they have a lot of issues with the way that they want to play, interactions between certain players from like a teamwork point of view. I think the only reason that they excel at LAN so much compared to online as well is that they get that pressure that focuses them to actually put their attention on the game rather than between each other or focusing on problems that they're having and stuff. So whenever they play in online, not only are they fighting a ping disadvantage, but I think they're also fighting like a mental problem of working together, having a style, being able to execute it, and personality clashes within the calling process as well. So you got to see them online. They're actually going to be moving over to a team house in North America. They've been planning to do it for ages, but there are definitely plans in the works. So hopefully once they're actually there, they'll be a little more focused on it. But I agree that it's hard to get a read on it. But that also applies to a lot of the players within. Like, there's a lot of talent within the Western scene that you don't see, but you also can't see because there aren't the tournaments and there aren't the LAN tournaments to be able to
Give us a couple of names then. Okay, so Monty, as he said on many episodes, doesn't watch the online tournaments very often, unless like a very significant one. And he's mainly watching the offline tournaments in Apex. So give us an example, a couple of people who, either they haven't got the team that's taken them to a big LAN yet, or maybe they just haven't had the right team to elevate their talent. Is there a couple of like up and coming people who in like 6 months will be a big deal?
I think there probably are. There's going to be loads that I'm not going to remember or anything, but the ones that spring to mind are the new. Who did they just get signed by? Hammers. They were previously the Chavs. They just got signed by Hammers. Jake, they have no, not Jake. No, Jake's on. Jake is on Hammers that just got signed by LG Evil. It's a confusing situation, but that team is also excellent. Like they've got some great players. They've been playing at that level for a while. But that new Hammers team that was the Chavs, a European side, has a really good guy called Snizzlenose, who is one of the most incredible
very memorable name. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably why it sprung to mind, right?
Okay.
So I think he's definitely one of the players to watch out for, depending on how the meta goes as well, because he did definitely excel at that particular one. All of the European teams have changed their orgs within like the last week. They were called Grand Danois. What are they called now? Team Singularity Ninjas. Another fantastic team name. What are they thinking? These
awful name.
Right. So they have a guy that they dropped a while back and they've just picked back up called Lelouch. And when he was playing, there was a huge like accusation storm around him because he was just pounding people that had previously. Who was he playing against? They were playing against Ninjas with Attitude with Hafikul on it, and they were playing against Nip and Misfits back in that kind of time. And he was plowing through those guys, and he got cut, I think, for personality issues, but they brought him back into the team. He's somebody to keep your eye out for. Dafran, another Danish guy who plays with a North American team. He's good. Who else is there? I don't know. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but there are definitely people to watch out for who, with the opportunity to show it, I think not only is Korea really good and has this huge, deep talent pool and has amazing teamwork and the ability to push their game to the next level, but they've also been gifted an amazing opportunity to show it and to build on that because they've got Apex there, which is by far and away the best league. Like it's the only league, but it's the best tournament ongoing circuit that exists in Overwatch at the moment. So it's not just, I think, that Korea is so good, which they definitely are, but they're also being given this great platform to actually showcase that talent. And
and they're also being given a long form tournament where people are grinding scrims day in and day out on a full time basis for months at a time. Because you're constantly involved in the competition. Because people need to remember, it's not only the 16 teams that are in Apex, it's also the 10 teams that are in Challenger as well. Some of those Challenger teams are fucking good too. There are some teams that people are going to be really surprised by coming up, like Rock's Orcas. So these teams, and talking to the professional players who have scrimmed these teams while they've been over here in Korea, and they say they're fucking good too. So basically, you've got 25 Overwatch teams in Korea that are dedicating just absolutely nose to the grindstone, kicking out scrims day in, day out. And you just don't have that pressure to perform right now in Europe or North America. Sure, teams want to be good, and we've got things like Carbon Series going on, but it's not the same level of dedication, which is also one of the reasons why the Korean teams have gotten better faster, because it's not that they probably would practice more under any conditions because they're Koreans, and that's what the Korean teams have always done in every esport. But it's also that the Western teams have not had a motivation to practice as hard because they are caught in this Overwatch League limbo that's occurring right now. And it's hard to motivate yourself when you're not actually practicing for a victory, right?
Yeah. So, for example, the worst team for this is currently Ninjas in Pyjamas, in my opinion, because they were a solid team that everybody was looking at and was hyping them up in terms of the games that they played against them behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They do have talented players on the roster as well, and they had like a style that was working well for them. They had performed at the Overwatch Open. They came into DreamHack. There was a lot of hype around them. They'd been crushing in the online series before that. They haven't played a game against a good team for 3.5 months. They just haven't played. Like, there's not been the opportunity. If they wanted to play, they would have had to play in a €500 tournament called the Strivewire, which is a community effort in Europe of people trying to drag whatever sponsors they can personally find into the scene because there's nothing else for them. And Ninjas have said, well, we'd rather just play scrims than have to dedicate our whole night to a tournament. Like, we'd rather stick to our routine, I presume. That's speculation from my part.
Okay.
But they haven't been playing matches for 3.5 months. Like, you can't possibly get a read on them. You don't know whether they're just terrible now or could be incredible or they could be anywhere in between. It's so difficult to tell.
So, okay, NIP is a good team to talk about, obviously, if you're over in Europe, because as you referenced here, I mean, I saw in some of the interviews you did with some of the top European players, every single one of them pretty much references NIP if they were scrimming in Europe, and they always talk very highly of them. Like, in scrims, they're so good, and it sounds like every time there's a meta change, NIP had some sort of unique take on it, you know, and they'd have something innovative. But when they actually got to the offline tournaments, I have to say they never really lived up to kind of like the hype that people were building for them in that sense. What is your take on that? What do you think that is?
Here's my take on NIP. In the time before, right, so in general, actually, they were crushing so much in online tournaments with one specific style that they had put all their cards on the table, and when it came to a LAN tournament, everybody was focused on taking out that particular style. So what happens in the West so much is that one team sets a style, and the other teams look at it and go, wow, that works so well. Like we saw with the quad tank meta in North America when it didn't really make sense, and there were very good counters to it. But Selfless and Hammers and some teams like that were having great success with it, and everyone else was like, gotta get on that. That is what I want some of. And so they were just playing quad tank the whole time. So that is the kind of thing that the Western teams do, whereas the Korean teams forge their own style and seem to work more off what they prefer playing and make it work for them. So Ninjas have put out their own style, which was incredibly unique at the time when it came out just before the Overwatch Open, around the time of the Lenovo Cup. They were first playing with this, like, originally triple tank, triple support, but then it like kind of evolved a little bit. They were playing with Zappos on the DPS hero most of the time with 2 supports. So they had put themselves out there and invited everybody else to analyze them and take them out. And when it came to the Overwatch Open, which was the first time that style got properly countered, it was Misfits that came up with this excellent May Reaper comp that wrecked them. Because not only did you have this really overpowered, I say overpowered, it was really powerful ult combo where you have the nano boost and you put the bubble on the Reaper and he goes in and shreds people with his Death Blossom. But when your ults aren't up, you have a huge ability to lock off the Reinhardt at the front or whoever happens to be playing in the front and shred them with the Reaper. So you've got the great synergy there. And Nevix and Soon played that tournament fantastically. And it was still insanely close. The game on Gibraltar came down to NIP full held them just after they came up out of Car Wash, and Misfits had to hold them in the bottom of Car Wash to take that map. It was mental. So so they performed, in my opinion, amazingly at that particular event, but they got countered, and that was they only had one strat. When they went into DreamHack after crushing everybody online, just wrecking Misfits repeatedly, I was watching those best of 3s and best of 5s, and they were getting dominated, Misfits, in the online games before that. And then they come into DreamHack, and Misfits don't have a plan for NIP. They don't have anything that works. They're just hoping. They were just going to run this triple DPS and see if it worked into them. And Fnatic had been looking at NIP as well, rather than Misfits, which ended up biting them in the butt as well, but had looked at NIP, and they had figured out that they just need to play maps that have high ground, because they never play with a diva. They have no ability to get up onto high ground. Like, the only player that can contest anything is Zappos when he plays the Winston. He jumps up there and he can just get shredded by Coolmat, who's playing up there inside of his healing area. I've forgotten what that ability is even called. But then, so
Bionic
they just
Field.
play, Bionic Field, that's the one. So they play Numbani, they play Volskaya, and they have a really good strat on Anubis, and they're able just to completely outplay them in terms of the strategy that they brought to the table. But again, that's because they had looked at them and identified them as the dominant team that they had to take care of. And then, obviously, it bites them in the butt when they play against Misfits, because Misfits outskill them on a just individual strength-to-strength basis, and they don't have a counter for Misfits. They had worked on getting rid of NIP. So I think the problem with NIP is that they have one style that they like to make very subtle alterations on. And it does have some weaknesses and ways that you can abuse it. And most of the teams that have one particular style in Korea, where you do see teams that have a style like Meta Athena, where they're playing around Hoon and have that very Zarya-focused gameplay with the DPS either sat at the back or playing tank alongside him, Libero, they have more alterations. They have ways that they can work against the counters that come at them. And NIP don't have that, apart from Zappis, who is, in my opinion, a real top-level flex player. I think he's excellent. But in terms of the overall team style, they don't actually have any ability to adapt and work against their counters. They just have one, or did have one excellent style. God knows what they're playing at the moment. They could be playing quad DPS for all I know.
If we took NIP and forced them, because obviously apparently they're not going to do it otherwise, at gunpoint, we forced them to go and play in Apex, how do you think they would do?
I don't think I can answer. I don't think anyone can answer that unless they've been playing scrims against them. But if I take the example of how they were playing in October, November 2016, which is 4 months ago, that was the last time I'd actually seen them play a lot. They, I think, would perform reasonably well, but I think the Korean teams are smart enough to be able to come up with counters that would work against them.
I will say that it's teams that have had one distinct strategy or play style have generally in Apex been figured out if given a long enough timeline to do so, even to the degree that we saw Lunatic-Hai losing to RunAway this past week. So I think it's pretty dangerous, and I think the teams that have the most diverse, I don't know if they could, I think they could maybe make top 8, but I don't know. Back in the day, that is.
Yeah.
Not right now, again, who knows how they could do now. But I do think it's hard to progress into the top 4 or the finals if you are so focused on a single style of play.
And here's the thing, it's not that they're limited by their hero pools in the same way that we've seen Envious that kind of look lost when they're going for these different compositions. NIP, I don't think, are actually limited by their hero pools. They're limited by the fact that they have put all of their time, whilst being a good team, into this strategy. And they haven't taken the time to diversify their playbook and add new things in. I don't think they're limited by the individuals they have on the team. I think it's a mentality thing. They were just aiming to be the absolute best at the style that they wanted to play.
I do think it's a time thing, though. Talking to some guys like Zappis at the Overwatch World Cup and hearing that he's still doing his law degree, basically, while playing on this team, I think that perhaps they were running a style because they didn't necessarily have the time to refine or to expand their hero pool, so better to refine the strategy that they felt that they could maximize the small amount of time that they had to go with. Maybe in the long run, if these guys were to go full-time professional, we might see a very different NIP style or multiple styles, let's say.
Yeah, I think they're definitely a team that you give them the opportunity to perform and you give them the competition, they're going to go places. They're not, because they had this, before they played this triple tank stuff, they were essentially like a middling tier 2 team within Europe. And then they found their style, but they also got picked up by Ninjas in Pyjamas at the same time, which gave them this opportunity to take it much more full-time. They do still have things on the side, as you're saying, but they were previously working full-time jobs at the same time as playing Overwatch, at the same time as doing whatever they were doing. So their opinion, which I agree with, is that they're not a team that, if they scrap this style, is going to go back to where they were previously. I don't think that would be reasonable to say that they're going to slump down. I think they're always going to be a team that's a strong one, but you can't just sit around not playing matches forever and still be at the top level, can you? I don't know.
I mean, my hope is that by getting to the point in Overwatch where enough investment comes in that every team, can pay good salaries and stuff, that eventually Taimou being Taimou just fucks up so much with social faux pas and things that you're not allowed to do in Western teams that he's forced to go back to only a finished team because they're the only ones who culturally can understand him and accept him as a person. And then we can start cooking with gas. Okay. Then we got a team we're starting out with here.
They seem like very different people, Taimou and the Ninjas in Pyjamas guys. I'm not sure that would work either.
I think that the rest of humanity is very different from Taimou, from knowing him. Love the guy, but He's
so funny.
he's hilarious, but he's a unique creature, that's for sure.
He is, and it's a good job that the West doesn't have quite the same unrealistic standards, we'll say, as Korean teams have. Otherwise, he could be, I don't know, sweeping the floors somewhere.
The thing about him, though, that's so bizarre is he's so good at the game. Like, he's so clearly naturally gifted and talented at the game, but there is some weird disconnect where it's like, it's not just that things he said have been like inappropriate or weird. It's like, what makes it weird is it's like, how have you lived in the world for so long and not understood it? It's like, I imagine him like, you know those things where you'll get like an alien in a movie that'll come to Earth, start to interact with humanity, or like some sort of a robot.
Are you describing yourself right now, Duncan?
No, definitely not. And then as soon as some incident happens, right, there'll be a scene where it goes on the internet and it starts researching like human history. And this is how I imagine Taimou. I imagine they said after that whole incident with the Twitch chat and Apex that they went away and they said, that's really like inappropriate what you've done socially there. So he went away and he was like researching like what is sexism, and he was looking up on Google, and then like that scene in the movie, where they look up and they're always looking at like the Holocaust and fucking Pol Pot and stuff, and there's like one tear rolling down their eyes. He was like discovering what actual sexism is and all the problems that have been through history. He was like, I never knew. Please, I didn't know. I was so innocent.
I think one of these things is that he's only existed in game. I mean, he's one of the people that they like to tag him as a TF2 guy, but he wasn't really a TF2 guy. He fell into the category of amazing players that didn't have a home, so happened to fall into TF2 for however long. And that actually applies to quite a lot of people. Like they were really good at video games. They didn't have one that they particularly liked. Like they tried CS:GO, didn't really fit for them. They wanted more of like a fluid thing or more movement based, and they'll have tried MOBAs and stuff and it didn't work out for them. And so they stuck to TF2 or Dirty Bomb or Battlefield, or like went between the three of them. And I think he's existed in small games that haven't had this attention for so long, and this applies to other people as well, like the Flower and Pine, who got brought up for some TF2 chat logs that they'd done like years and years ago. What is going on there?
Yeah.
But we'll get into that.
I mean, my favourite one has to be that stupid one about Taimou, though, that's like listed on his Wikipedia, where it says that, I'll read it out here, Monty, because it's one of those things.
Is this what
where
I think it's going to be?
Oh no,
I think
it's the one about the terrorism. Right. Yeah, have you ever read that one? So basically, right, I'm sure the context of it, there was something that would make some sense. But if you just hear it read out in like sort of like a newsreader would read it out, it just makes it so hilarious, right? So I'll read it out like, Taimou has been banned from ETF2L for insulting nationality, taunting terrorism victims via offensive team names, and ignoring admin warnings, on top of his previous offences. Like, come on.
By the way, I know what that team name was, and I'm not going to say it because we don't need to bring it up, but it's pretty fucking awful.
I just love the end though, on top of his previous offences. Like, okay, come on, Sideshow.
You were saying like, I'm sure there's some context where it makes sense, or it was like in some joke or something. It really wasn't. Like Taimou was that kind of guy back then, and he actually has matured, and that's why I think you can't go rifling back through what people did ages ago and try and
look. Teenagers are going to do dumb teenage things.
Yeah.
You can't really hold it against them in my mind. But
yeah, and he's constantly. I mean, I'm using him as an example, but this applies to so many people. A lot of the players who currently play Overwatch have existed in an online or esports world for the most of their youth and didn't have an aim or an idea that they would make it big at any point. And all of their interactions, can you imagine if like all of your sports interactions with your sports friends were in a digital media where they could all be written down and logged and then held back for you like in the future?
It's appalling, isn't it?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense
America got a president that shows that Twitter is irrelevant now. All the shit you say online, it really has no bearing on your ability to be a public figure. So
he doesn't have a team manager to dismiss him or force him to step down.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
Okay, so a team that is full of, at least the original lineups were full of TF2 players I wanted to ask you about for some insight on outside of the Overwatch world is NRG. Because one of the things that I think I didn't really understand myself when I was researching it, I kept watching that team in the early lands in Overwatch, and I kept, like, if I'm being honest, I used to just think, I have no idea why this team stays together. Like, if you look at them, like some of their players, it clearly doesn't work out that well actually in the official matches. They can say behind the scenes, it was awesome and we knew what we were doing and stuff, but it's irrelevant. If you looked in the game, you were like, there's clearly some good pieces here, but why do they keep this core together? But then when I looked into like the background of some of the players and sort of the relationships in the team, is that one of those teams where, for whatever reason, coming from TF2, etc., they had some preconceived notion that like TF2 players were going to be better, or they should just, all of those guys somehow got some unreal working relationship, they have to stick together? What's your take on NRG?
They've been through a number of roster changes in their times. So they originally formed, and I mean, if we don't go all the way back to the close beta, but they were playing on LG with a lineup with like Milo, Seagull, Enigma. God, who else was in that team? I think Dummy joined at some point to replace Esper or whatever. But I think from pieces of conversations that I've had with them, I haven't like got this out of them because it's something that I've been interested in as well, but I've not got the whole truth out of them. But the bits that I've pieced together, it seems to be that they have a mindset from TF2 of how to play Overwatch, and they have an approach to it that is the style that they want to play, and they know
That's what
how
they told
to,
me when
right,
they changed out when Gods left and they changed out their members when they were here in Korea. They said they felt more comfortable because their theoretical framework and philosophy around the game, they felt more comfortable with other TF2 players.
And they know how to interact in terms of communication. They know what they're going to bring to the table. I think it was less of a risk for them. They knew them from other games. I don't think it was as incestuous as people make out, in the sense that they just thought, oh, this guy was good from TF2 and I happen to know him, so bring him in. I think it was more that they genuinely thought there would be skills that ported over that either didn't happen, or they ended up having a team whose individual hero playstyles didn't actually mesh together to form an actual team, even if what they brought to the table from a calling point of view or from a understanding the game point of view did mesh together. So in fact, the change where they changed at Apex was even stranger, because they were intending to make some different changes and then didn't. And so it sent them spiraling, and they actually had to bring in some people kind of last minute. And so they were making changes that they hadn't fully thought through because of the time constraints of Apex coming up. So the changes that they're making now, having been removed from Apex and removed from large tournaments for a while, I think are going to make the roster much more what they had in mind way back when they first started having difficulty with NRG.
And have they cured what ails them? Have they found a good mix now, do you think?
Just from looking at the roster at paper, because I haven't seen them play, and the actual roster hasn't even been confirmed yet, but it's been all but confirmed, I would say. I think from what they seem to have on paper, it looks like a very good mix. A team that has balanced out their lack of carry talent, because Seagull's definitely, like, although he picked up the game really quickly at the beginning and looked really promising, hasn't had that continuous climb and is now just a reasonably good player at the heroes that he plays with some pocket picks.
Keep going, okay.
I'm going to get slammed by people on Twitter for that.
Keep going,
So they've picked up IDD. If they can work around the problems that got him removed from previous teams in the past, then that's going to be a good pickup for them. And I feel like they're the kind of team that probably could. They're getting Ajax in as well, who'll be a good addition to them in terms of the calling and support structure of their team. And Harblu, I think, is going to be an interesting addition to the team in what he adds. If they can make it mesh together, it sounds like a good thing to me on paper, but you got to see these things actually play out. I think there's been so many times where I've seen changes happen and gone like, I don't understand what's going on there, and then watch the game and gone, that's what they were going for, and then it's made sense, and vice versa as well. So I wouldn't like to say too much, too concrete at this point, but it seems okay.
Monty, what do you think of the new NRG?
I
speculate
again.
Speculate.
I haven't really seen Ajax play hardly at all, so I don't really have an opinion of him as a player. I think Harblue has had some good game sense and fits well as a team player who has certain specialties on heroes like Zarya and Roadhog. I think Numlock's going to have to shift back to Lucio in this arrangement, I would assume, correct?
I think he's going to stay on main tank, and they're going to have Ajax.
He's going to play on Reinhardt, and then he's going to play flex. So what the fuck is Harblue playing?
No, I think Harblue's going to be playing flex, and Numlock's going to be playing tank, and then they're going to have dummy on like flexible.
Where's
Ajax and Lucio, I believe, but that might be that's speculation from my point. I haven't heard the actual.
And they told me when they were out here that they brought Numlocked on because they wanted his voice and his mind for the shot calling, which is why he was originally on Lucio. So switching him to Reinhardt, where it's difficult to shot call because you can't see very much, is. But
actually, that was his decision. It was actually Numlock's decision to move back to tank because he felt more comfortable shot calling from that role. I assume because that's where he's been shot calling from for other teams in his history of Overwatch. So he has like this.
Well, whatever works.
Whatever. Well, if it works, right? It's like whatever.
It wasn't
works
working at Vegas, so
exactly.
That's what I know. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I agree. IDDQD, you're throwing a bunch of. And Ajax, from what I understand, has had his own share of personal issues and volatility in the past. Not that I know much about that, but that was a reason behind his removal from some other teams. So I don't know. It seems like they're going to have a very strong hand guiding that team if they are going to deal with people who have had a rough time with teammates in the past, like IDDQD. It could work really well, but I'd be concerned about the dynamic within the team from day one.
Because one of the things I found interesting about teams like that, where a lot of them obviously have, like, if not direct past relationships, they know each other from past games, and that's what you initially get the sense they're building some of the premise off of how a player's going to be or how good he could be, is that I actually think that was a flaw of some of the Western teams at the beginning of Overwatch, was thinking that, like, essentially thinking that they were putting too much stock in the TF2 history and thinking that, people who were the best in that game would get to the top of Overwatch, which is an assumption that, sure, like, some of them will, but you can't really assume they will all, because I'll give you a story from CSGO that a lot of people don't know, even in CSGO, because they haven't really thought it through in this particular sense, which is everyone who into esports has heard the story that the Ninjas in Pyjamas team at the beginning of competitive CSGO won their first 87 offline games. So they won, like, I think it was 10 LANs in a row. And, it's not that no one could challenge them. There was, for example, in the first 4 tournaments, there was a French team called Very Games who always made the final and lost to NIP there. So, there was a team that was very close to them. It's just NIP always won. Now, one of the factors people don't know is that they think that means, like, NIP just, they found the perfect way to play and they must have had all the best players and they just locked into this. Well, now, to an extent, it's true. They had, like, 2 of the best players, for example. Like, their 2 carry players were probably the best at that. And some of the other players in the team who were role players had, like, specialties that kind of applied at that point in time. But another factor that no one thinks about, because it has nothing to do with NIP, is if you actually look at the circumstances of the CSGO scene at the time, what happened was when CSGO began, 1.6 actually hadn't officially ended as a competitive game. So there was actually 3 teams in 1.6 who were the best, who stayed playing 1.6, while these players who became NIP sort of were the early pioneers. They came into CSGO, and so early CSGO was NIP and then a bunch of the Source teams, because Source did kind of end immediately as soon as CSGO began. So what happened was, in that span when NIP was unbeatable, in came those 1.6 teams who'd kind of held out in the old game and won the last tournaments, And the flaw that they made was they just kept the exact same lineup that they had in 1.6. And so 2 of them, one of them actually, Na'Vi, became pretty good, They became maybe like a top 3 team. But the flaw was, and the other team, by the way, one of them was the Poles, the guys who became Virtus Pro now. But the flaw that both of these teams had was they kept thinking, no matter what problem occurred in the game, like, okay, well, I mean, we were all really good in 1.6 and our team was really good. So if anyone isn't good at CSGO, if they'd have been a brand new player in the lineup, you'd just go, that guy's not working out. Let's get someone new in. Or you know what? He doesn't fit what we need from the team. So get a guy who can do that. But instead, they kept thinking to themselves, no, this guy was really good in 1.6. So, if we give him time, he'll get to that level again. Or, he could do this role in 1.6. So maybe he can do it in CSGO. And so actually, part of why NIP remained undefeated essentially is that other teams that could have been contenders just had a naive way of thinking that the game was the same as the old game. And when those teams started to make the changes was when not only did NAP not become just the number one team, but then there was, suddenly then those teams themselves went up and they could win tournaments and they could be the best. So I actually think in Overwatch, to a lesser degree, I think some of that went on because it feels like the TF2 players, I'm sure they did have an advantage in some concepts if someone came purely from Counter-Strike or a MOBA, There's certain things you'd have to learn from the scratch. But actually, we could almost tie it into the double lift logic that we said before. You can't think that because someone came from Counter-Strike, he will always be 5 years of TF2 behind you in Overwatch. What do you think, Sideshow? Is there any parallels here?
I think the premise is good, but I think your end result is off because the people that have come from other games have actually just had even less success. Like the people who've come from Quake, who used to be really good, and the people who've come from CS, who used to be really good, have stayed at that lower level beneath the other people. But what you've actually seen is the people who are just natively Overwatch players have risen up, and that wouldn't have happened at the beginning of the scene. That has to take time to develop those players because they need their time to grind it out and learn the game and be able to get their own talent. I think that was inevitable that was going to happen as well. The people were crying about it back in the beta when they couldn't get into the beta, and they're like, "Oh, these people have got a 6-month head start. How am I ever going to get in?" It's like, well, obviously, people are just going to rise up. You've got years to play this game. What are you talking about?
This is why a bunch of people were complaining about not having beta and saying, "Oh, wow, the beta players are going to be so far ahead." I was thinking to myself, no, in fact, the pro players that are pro players 6 months after launch are probably not going to be anywhere near the same pool of pro players that are going to be there when Overwatch League starts, because there's going to be enough time for these endemic Overwatch players, because these guys were good, all right? They were great in other games. You can be great at TF2, but you're still playing with a very small pool of players. When it's a game the size of Overwatch, it's just a matter of numbers that you can have great players in any game, but when there's a small community versus a community of 25 million accounts that are currently, that was the last release number we had of Overwatch, whether those were created or active accounts, we don't really know. But if there are 25 million active monthly players in Overwatch, that is an enormous pool of talent to pull from, and you're just going to naturally have some outliers, people who have been playing other games who are now peaking in Overwatch, and these people are likely to be much better than probably any TF2 pro we have ever seen.
I think it's definitely going to get to that point where these people start getting less and less. I actually expected it to go more your way, and in a sense, I'm kind of surprised that there still are so many people that were good in other games at the top of the scene. Now, that might be something to do with the fact that they've got in those positions, and it's difficult to actually work your way up because there aren't sponsor opportunities and stuff for these people who are actually trying to get in there as much. But the players people like Tvik, who have been able to transfer those skills and become excellent, are, in a sense, to me, the outliers, because you expect people to be able to have some skill and port that over and be good. But the people who've been able to come in and then just perform excellently, I think those are the people that, people like Tvik, like Flower, like Zebasai, these people from TF2, and you've got your other players from Firefall and Enemy Territory as well. Those ones are the outliers in a sense that I think those are going to carry on as well, because they've already proven that they are good enough to be able to outlast the eventual dying off of the old guard that's inevitably going to happen.
Because actually the one area that's still untapped, so everyone talks about we've seen all the Western teams because we've seen them play all those online cups and then now all these LANs, and now everyone knows from watching Apex the Koreans, how good they are. The real untapped area that people still don't account for is sooner or later there's going to be either some amazing Chinese player or just a whole team that becomes really good. And when that happens, then it'll really be insane. I mean, this is the analogy I would give, It doesn't matter, Sideshow, that much like every other game, it seems, China initially starts out not even understanding the concept of what a meta game is. They just play in their own way, and they can run into a brick wall over and over again. And until they get so strong at running into brick walls that they can smash brick walls, they just die at the brick wall. My analogy I always give, and by the way, this is going to be a Taimou level analogy where it's incredibly inappropriate relative to history, is, to me, the Koreans are like the Germans of World War II, They learn the military tactics, they design innovative new things, they have the regiment that's there, they've got the training system in place, Not all of them are on meth. That was a different thing, you know. But they have the leader who, you know, they all follow his commands. I'm even tying the Hitler into it, Monty. So they got that. Whereas here's the secret, okay. This is why we need the Chinese, okay, guys. Because the Chinese are the Russians.
Are the Russians?
And the Russians' approach is to just throw as many men at this problem as it takes until you get some success. And eventually we will overwhelm you.
They literally didn't have any weapons, and they would just throw thousands of peasants with pitchforks, like running across to try and attack machine gun nests. Because if you just throw enough at them, eventually they run out of bullets or can't kill them all fast enough to prevent you from getting pitchforked in the face.
Is there? You're talking about this, but is there actually a precedent that I'm ignorant of in other esports where China's done this? What is this based on?
No, he's just saying that there are so many Chinese people that eventually, even though they lack the same level of organization, they eventually produce like really sick results at some point.
Essentially, Chinese players in esports games, they're using the million monkeys with a million typewriters principle, where if you get enough monkeys and enough typewriters, you will accidentally get all of Shakespeare's shine show. So all I'm waiting for is if we keep scaling up the number of Chinese players, we will get amazing players. Plus, obviously, I mean, there is some precedent. Like, for example, in Counter-Strike, they actually have an okay team now, even though they have, no access to practice against the West. They obviously had some good players in 1.6, and obviously it goes without saying, in Dota, they have absolutely been extremely good at MOBA games. So for me, as long as there's enough people play Overwatch there, and the key detail at the moment that they're lacking is, sure, we had APAC, but they need to have more tournaments where they actually interact with the ecosystem of the West. Because I've noticed in every single esports game, until they interact on a regular basis, China just lives in their own bubble of a meta. And sometimes they can be very good at that because they build up so many good players, but it's almost like the brute force approach, whereas there's the whole good thing about Western esports is you got in all this interaction of like culture and philosophy and people coming in from different angles that you're kind of like error correcting the game to some degree in terms of how you play the meta game.
Well, they already announced the Overwatch Premier Series for China, which essentially locks them off from any outside sources.
There will be another APAC though, so.
But that's towards the end of the year, and the rest of their circuit is just playing in that. So, I mean, their top teams are going to be tied up, even if people wanted to invite them to other places.
Maybe they'll turn out, Chinese Overwatch will turn out like Chinese League of Legends then, where they're sort of competitive sometimes, and you can tell they have a lot of individual skill, but they haven't quite put together the training regimen or coaching or strategic elements to actually maximize their individual skill into a team game.
I'll tell you a region where there is actually a good team that nobody is paying any attention to at the moment, and that's the Oceanic region. They've actually got one good team, but they are really good. They've been solely playing for the last 4 months, only on Japanese servers against Korean teams, because the people that they normally play against and just dominate in domestic tournaments. They've been playing in the Australian tournaments and just slamming them for 4 months. They've been playing the Taiwanese tournaments and wrecking them as well. They've just been taking first place in most of the Southeast Asia tournaments. And so they've been purely scrimming Korean teams. And from looking at bits of them, they do actually look like a world-class team that hasn't had the opportunity to show that on any kind of stage that people are paying attention to.
What is the name of this team?
Fusion Girls is the current name.
By the way, the llast time I thought that about an isolated FPS team in Australia, I got burned pretty badly. So maybe
just a bit of a caution. Don't put your name to this.
Then again, though, Monty,
I may be biased.
we can't blame you, because let's be fair. What is the main detail I sold you on that team was like, don't worry, mate. It doesn't even matter if they're good now because they can speak English. So we'll just bring in all these NA players. Little did we know that right there was the fucking impossible feat. That's like climbing Mount Everest to get them to actually do that, right? So turned out I was wrong, Monty. They won't do that whatsoever.
That will happen in Overwatch, though. Like, if you wanted to, that's what I was thinking. I was considering writing an article on this, but I didn't get around to it yet. It's about Fnatic clearly need a change, right? I think at this point the team needs to bring somebody in that's going to add an injection of talent to the team. They've already brought in Hafikul recently, who's got a lot of talent on a lot of different heroes, but isn't enough to carry the team. He's not the kind of guy that you're going to put your resources on and go, yeah, go for it, and we'll stand behind you. And Buds, at the moment, has just been missing from games for months. Like, he just isn't on the level of the other hitscan DPS players. So they already have Custer in the team. Who's originally from Australia, who moved up to Canada just as Overwatch, not Canada, the United States, just as Overwatch started to, oh no, it was Canada.
It was
anyway.
Canada, I talked to him.
Yeah. And they've proven that they're able to integrate a lot of cultures into the team without that being explosive. They're a really great bunch of guys. It's a lot of fun to hang out with them. They obviously have a lot of fun within their unit. So if you could persuade them that they need a change, which will be the hardest part of that, I think you could definitely pick up individually solid players from Australia and bring them over. Like Yuki, who's currently looking for a team, is a really solid player. I don't think he particularly fit into Fnatic, but that's the kind of thing that I think teams like that definitely could be doing to stock up some real individual great talent, even if the teams themselves are not going to get an opportunity to compete from Oceania.
Oh, here's the other thing as well, Sideshow, that you have to understand. If you didn't follow any MOBA games, this is one of the disconnects that people don't realize about Chinese esports, is that as long as the game gets big enough, right, that everyone who's in like Vici Gaming and EDG and all these big orgs, as long as they all get involved, the top orgs, some of those orgs are funded by people who are like the sons of like billionaire businessmen, and they essentially will be like the Premiership. Like they will just like, say Flower really will never be allowed to be in another team because of his past and something. They'll just pay him like 200 grand to come over and be the star player and not have any fucking clue what everyone's saying in Mandarin and just shoot people basically. That'll be his job, but he'll be so wealthy that he'll just do it. And then and that also is another mad brute force approach, which actually has worked in, believe it or not, in League of Legends. At one point, they actually beat the best Korean team doing that. Admittedly, it was short-lived, but it was still amazing. It was a great sort of Island of Dr. Moreau style experiment, right, Monty?
Yeah, it's been interesting, and there's also the possibility that without region locking, that they could bring entire Korean teams over to China as well to compete, as can anybody, ostensibly under the international rules that Overwatch is going to be functioning under. And I think that there's been a lot of talk recently because Nate Nancer, the director of Overwatch Esports, was in Korea, and regionalizing in Korea doesn't actually make very much sense. And we've discussed this because half the population of the country lives in one city, and Korean teams just don't do that. Even if the baseball teams play in different cities, there's still several in Seoul, and they're all named after corporations like SK, for example, or Kia. So it's just a different convention. But I do think that Overwatch League is something that could work very well in China because of the size and large geographic diversity of the country. Having regionalized teams seems like it would be a natural fit for China. And if there's one thing that's going to, I think, push... Now, take this with a grain of salt, because my knowledge of the Chinese esports business infrastructure and ecosystem is pretty fucking weak.
Okay,
on the
get
whole.
your Weldon on. Come on. Okay, let's see where this goes.
It's pretty fucking weak. But I'm just saying that it seems like the regionalization would be beneficial because it would spread everything out into all the corners of China instead of everything just being forced into Shanghai. And it seems like that's a country with a sizable enough population and huge urban centers that could really work with that type of model.
See, here's the thing, Monty. In certain languages, like two of them that I'm aware of are like Chinese and Russian, is like the way that whenever they translate things that they've said in their language into English, it always comes off really weird and like very like almost poetic, the way it's written. So when they take what you just said there and translate it into Chinese, they're going to say like, Monty said that Blizzard will smash the Shanghai hegemony and cast Chinese esports to the winds to the four winds of like. It'll sound a lot worse, mate. You said it very reasonably, but that could get bad. The mistranslation is everything.
Do you think the Overwatch League idea would work in Korea if instead of attaching teams to cities, they did just attach them to corporations? If instead of marketing it towards the cities, they would do that? But I mean, for Overwatch, do you think that would work for Overwatch as well?
Well, I do it for LoL, so sure. I mean, we have SKT and KT and Jennair and all those teams. That's how it works.
And they would just be able to compete on the world
Overwatch League
scale at the end.
That's what they do in LoL, so sure. I think that, I don't know. I think that's sort of a minor complaint, and one of the things that was said out here was that Overwatch, it will be, the structure is going to be tailored to regions, so it's not, everything's in flux right now, right? No decisions have been made about how exactly this is going to fit other regions. I don't think even Blizzard wants to take Overwatch League to regions that are not interested in their rev share model or their system that they have in store. So,
okay, Monty, I've got to ask about this. Okay, so here's all cards on the table. Here's my issue with Overwatch League, is that Blizzard came in with this big announcement, right? That we're going to do esports this way, and the problem is it was still pretty vague. Like, they made a few allusions to things they wanted to do, and then it reminded me a bit of Riot.
They released a video. They released a video saying that they were going to roll out a worldwide league over time in North America, Europe, Oceania and Southeast Asia, China, and Korea. So 5 different major regions, right? And over time, they were going to roll out Overwatch League to be a truly global league with geolocation and a rev share system. Now, that is an insanely ambitious thing to say, right?
So here's the problem I have, right? Is first of all, it was super vague. So I was thinking, okay, let's get some more details here. Every sort of direction they went to, where it was like there was a lot of questions, people were very skeptical. It felt like Blizzard were, well, I didn't necessarily say I was definitely going to do that. Like I meant in the future I have a plan to one day do that. Like no, I didn't say when I'd do it. I just said one day. You know, when I meant geolocations, I meant like the name of a location might be used. It's like, okay, what's going on? Like it was so political, Monty. And so my problem is, I actually don't think that they're just like, they've got a plan, basically. It feels like they're just coming up with stuff on the fly, and then every day it changes. And who the fuck? And it's only got a few months left before it has to start, Monty. This isn't like a 10-year plan to fucking for them go to space or something. They've got to start soon.
Well, I think that at the very least, because this is going to be, it seems like a shortened season because it's starting in Q3 of this year, that I do think that they're going to limit the rollout probably to specific regions, most likely North America, because of all the information that we have and everybody who they invited to BlizzCon, et cetera, at the start. And then as time goes on, year after year, try and expand it into other regions. So I think they were laying out their big plan, but I don't think that they're going to do a global rollout by Q3. I think that's not going to happen. It can't.
I don't think it could happen either because they've already announced things for other regions. Like it just wouldn't make sense. So. Yeah,
it seems like there's stuff going on into Q3 already from China, right?
Yeah, that's their plan so far. So yeah, I don't. Well, nobody knows how it's going to actually happen, right? But
including Blizzard.
I really don't think that from being in Korea, it can happen in Korea this year. I think that Apex is probably just going to keep rolling for the time being. Maybe in 2018 things might change. It's always possible things could change in Korea before that, but I would think I would have some inkling that was going to occur. So I think most of it is going to be, at least in 2017, limited to North America or North America and Europe.
So the other issue is the notion that Blizzard, essentially the problem with the Overwatch League is at the moment, Overwatch is fairly organic. Like it's just the old school model. Tournament organizers put on tournaments. Teams that want to go there or qualify go there. There's a lot of mobility between regions. Again, teams can be based anywhere. They can be with any company. But Overwatch League spells their attempt to go the Riot model. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to bring all the negatives of the Riot model, where they were incredibly capricious in who they let own a team and how they treated people and what they did to people's business interests, etc. I mean, you wouldn't know anything about it, Monty. So
no.
But one of the issues that I think rightfully a lot of people in the esports industry are skeptical of, and we're not talking about beginners here, people who are experts in esports, is this notion that not only will Blizzard to some degree decide who gets to sort of have a slot in Overwatch, but this news that came out that potentially spots might go for tens of millions of dollars, more than just even $1 million.
All right. So what we're talking about now is an article that came out not in an endemic esports source, but in the Sports Business Journal, right? And so this is an industry journal for sports. So it's an important article, and there was speculation in there that rumors behind the scenes were that slots were supposed to go for between 2 and 5 million, and maybe 10 million for a city like Los Angeles. And everybody started to freak out about this. I saw people freaking about it on the competitive subreddit. I saw Richard Lewis freaking out about it in a video. Everybody seems to have, Slasher was freaking out about it on Twitter. Everybody latched onto this. But what I think people forgot is that Blizzard said this is going to be a bidding process, which means that if nobody bids $2 to $5 million for a team, then that's not going to be what a team is sold for. There have to be, the market will correct itself. So here's how it's going to go. So we know from that article, Nate Dancer was interviewed, who is the chief guy behind all of the Overwatch League. He's the director. He is now meeting with team owners, potential team owners, to discuss the actual nuts and bolts, which is what we all want to know. What is the rev share model going to look like? What does the franchising actually mean? What is Blizzard's commitment to this league? Because remember, they have to sell this to these team owners, but there has to be a minimum guarantee. What is the minimum guarantee? Is Blizzard telling these team owners that they're going to get a franchise slot, they're going to get a sick amount of rev share from the game? Are they getting rev share from in-game items? That's still up in the air. Are they getting rev share from selling of broadcast rights, sponsorships, ticket sales? Who the fuck knows what the rev share is, right? So that goes into the consideration of how much a team is valued for. And also, what is Blizzard's minimum commitment? Because no one is going to sign over to become a franchise team in this league and pay these fees if Blizzard itself is not committing to a minimum number of years that this league is going to run. So the question of how much a team is worth, which is why no one who doesn't know these numbers can judge. And this is one of the biggest problems that I had with Richard Lewis's video, is he's saying that from a business perspective, it is absolutely not worth that amount of money. We don't know what's in that contract. If Blizzard is saying to these team owners that they are committing to 10 years of running the Overwatch League, and they are contractually obligated to produce it at a certain level and spend X amount of dollars over a 10-year period and X amount of dollars per year, and they're giving sick rev share, and these team owners are getting rev share from in-game item sales, and Blizzard's saying, we are going to spam this so hard. It's going to be on the login screen when you get into Overwatch. We're going to create all these websites. We're going to create all this shoulder content. We're going to make sure that everybody knows that Overwatch League is going on. And maybe they have sponsors lined up. Maybe they have broadcast partners lined up. Maybe they've already cut a big deal with TV or something like Riot has with MLB AM. We don't know fucking anything. But if all of this stuff goes through, or some of it, or none of it, that affects the valuation of the team, right? You have to know what you're buying. So no one knows what these teams are worth right now because A, the market has not decided, and B, we don't even know what the terms of the agreement are to make a proper budgetary business decision. What if Blizzard is saying to these team owners, if you buy in at $5 million, we are guaranteeing you a certain minimum amount of money a year. We're going to guarantee you, no, not buy in at $5 million, but make a bid. They say, we're going to guarantee you a minimum of $3 million over the first 5 years. That's the least amount of money that from our profit sharing or our rev sharing we will give you. And if we can't generate that money, we will have to pay you that ourselves. Well, then all of a sudden a $5 million bid doesn't seem so weird because you know there's going to be $3 million minimum coming back. These are all factors. So it is way too early, unless, besides the people who actually know these numbers, which are apparently done now, according to that article. So some Blizzard knows, and they've started to tell people what these numbers are. And that's the crucial piece of information that is missing, and that nobody should be freaking out until the bids come in and we actually see what those numbers are. Or maybe they'll never release the rev sharing, but we'll get an idea of what smart businessmen think of those numbers, because they will bid certain amounts in response, right?
Okay, here's the problem with that, Monty. Here's the problem with that, okay? That sounded really great if you exist in some abstract universe where, in theory, no one can know. Therefore, there could be this locked, like Schrodinger's cat type box that until they open it, no one will know whether or not Overwatch League is alive or dead based on what deals Blizzard has got and what their rev share is. The problem with all of that is that we're not talking to someone who's come in from the outside who knows nothing about esports. We're talking about people who are industry insiders in esports. So they're looking at what's reasonable as an expectation and what's likely. So all these factors you've listed here, sure, they all certainly could be absolutely have merit and be viable and make money. But the problem I have with that logic is, first of all, like it implies that like Blizzard could have a huge broadcast deal, but not a single person in the world knows except Blizzard and that company. It implies Blizzard could have all these sponsorships lined up, but that never has slipped to anyone. No investigative journalist can get any in on that whatsoever, even an inkling that these companies are talking with them. It implies that all these team owners who are being contacted and talking to them, none of them ever let it slip. Monty, I've been to so many bars with team owners who have 4 drinks in them, and they start telling you everything. They start telling you how they're wrecking their own player on a streaming deal, like that,
I don't think because these conversations. Look, I know where Nate was. He was in Korea, and I was talking to him while he was here, and so that was in late February. So these meetings have just begun, and based on the fact that of who Blizzard invited to BlizzCon, I don't think that these conversations have been with endemic teams that are most likely to spill the beans.
Was it some of the scions of the Illuminati?
I think he's probably.
What are you implying here? Okay.
Major team owners from baseball, NFL, NBA, these kind of guys. Now, the other thing, Duncan, is that yes, you present some good points, but it's also like it's only been a few days. So let's wait and see if those leaks come out, would be my response to that, because it's highly possible, because all of this shit has been either still being crafted. And part of that article was an answer saying that this was the legal framework for creating the league. It took a long time to make and is now finished and in a presentable state where they can actually show these options. So in response to your criticism, I would say, maybe there hasn't been enough time for it to leak yet. I don't know the answer. So yes, I will see what happens, because I, like you, think that when the endemic owners get involved, that there's going to be a lot more leaks of details.
Okay.
But I don't think that's happened yet.
Here's the thing that I don't understand about what's been talked about as well, that's slightly different to what you guys were discussing, is that I don't understand, from what I know of North American sports, which admittedly is quite little, and the way that is then going to port over to esports, why there would be a difference of 3 times as much from what they're pricing, or what these leaks are or rumors are saying would be the price of one city compared to what they've quoted for Los Angeles. Because the way that I'm envisioning the actual generation of profit from the people who are investing in these teams, I doubt that they're going to be sharing the revenue differently depending on which city it is. So it's going to be the generation of resources from having a good team or a fan base of that city. And you don't have fan bases of cities in teams, and that's not going to develop for years, possibly ever, within the Overwatch League. It's going to be about the players and the success that they have, surely.
Okay, well, I disagree with that. There will be some of that, sure, because that's the way esports has always been. But I personally believe that by geolocating, you're going to tap into a new group of fans who would not necessarily be as enthusiastic if there was not a local team to support.
Wait a minute, so who are these new group of fans?
I think they're people. For example, when I was at BlizzCon, I was chatting with a bunch of people who were watching the Overwatch World Cup who were saying that they weren't really typically esports fans, but when they came to BlizzCon, they really enjoyed watching all the various championships. And talking to these people, some of them I just straight up asked, where are you from? And I said, if there was an Overwatch team in your city, do you think that would make you watch more esports or competitive Overwatch? And they said yes, because I was just curious after they announced it. Obviously, super unscientific and small sample size. But I do think that there for some people, it's not the anchor for being a fan is not necessarily the players themselves, but the fact that it's a team from where they're from and from their home city that they get to cheer with, and it's a community-based thing with other residents of that city. So I do think that there are occasional esports fans that could be turned into much more hardcore fans by having this geolocation. That's my feeling about it.
Wait a minute, though, but you can't keep using that term, geolocation. Like, okay, so location on the Earth. What the fuck does that mean? Like, okay, so is the team now, like, okay, so NRG?
I feel like we're getting into a space.
NRG is now called the Cleveland Steamers, right? Presumably, they don't play in Cleveland, right? They don't play their games in Cleveland?
I would doubt that would happen at this stage of things, but I would think that eventually that's where the league would want to go, is to home and away games. But I don't see home and away games happening in the first few years of Overwatch League. I just don't think that there's enough people to justify that in terms of broadcast for selling tickets for on-site events.
Okay, so then, so at the moment, essentially, they're still NRG. I've just rebranded the name, right? So the plan initially, somehow, is that now people who are from Cleveland are going to be fans of what was NRG. That's what the geolocation means?
People from Cleveland are going to be, well, some of them might be, just like sometimes you like a team that's from your home region. Sometimes you have a fandom of a team that's not, for various other reasons.
Okay, but what's the benefit of rebranding as Cleveland then, unless I'm getting all these people from Cleveland to be my fans?
Well, I think that in time there will be home and away games, and it's about starting somewhere. I think that's what people don't get, is that you can't just start this off the bat and go immediately into home and away games. I think that this is intended over time to start grooming a grassroots local fan base. Now, your question of how can they have that if they're not necessarily playing games in Cleveland? Well, there's a lot of stuff that they could do in terms of promotion in Cleveland, having the team's practice facilities in Cleveland, having them do Cleveland community interaction, because remember, Overwatch is supposed to have a pretty lengthy off season. It's not supposed to be a year-long league like League of Legends. So presumably there would be enough time for them to go do stuff there. Also, we don't even know what the format of the competition is going to be yet. It doesn't necessarily have to be like LCS, where everything only happens in Los Angeles with rare exceptions for playoffs or other special matches. It's possible that the entire league could move around the country or around the world, and maybe part of the season is played in Cleveland, but not all of it.
I think the other thing as well is that if you didn't have traditional sports teams playing in stadiums nearby, people would still be attached in some sense to them just based on their name and the fact that you like hype it up as they come from there, or whatever association that you give them to latch onto. I know a lot of football fans are fans of the people from their hometown, even though they've never gone and actually watch the game, so it doesn't actually matter to them at all that they play within that region. They could exist purely on television, and they could still associate with them, because people will just jump on any association they can. I'm
people
still
are
not sure
tribal,
whether
man.
It will. Yeah.
See, Thor, this is like I feel like a lot of the time, because you don't have these instincts, that you sort of deny that they exist. But like, that tribalism is a really powerful force for a lot of people. And I do think that it's something that esports has failed to tap into, because people's location and hometowns are incredibly important to them.
But what would the connection be? Like in this scenario,
well, that's what I'm saying.
The owner isn't from the region, the players aren't from the region, the game doesn't take place in the region. They just took the name. So they came to one day, do you like Overwatch? Yeah, you're from Cleveland, you support this team now. But why? Cleveland, you win. Hey. You know, what's the trigger word here?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There could be off-season stuff that's done in that city to help integrate the community with the team. like I said, in terms of practice facility, or that'll be up to the individual teams to figure out how exactly that's going to work.
Also, here's the problem, Monty, okay? So even more, like, here's the thing. America's very different than the UK in this sense. So one of the things about Britain is obviously football is basically the only real sport there. Like, the other sports are very niche, you know, and they have, like, a cream of the crop of the best players, but there's not, like, the same massive ecosystem reach of football. So with football, the interesting thing is actually the people have moved away from that old approach, which you're talking about, to my approach, which is that you're just a fan of people who are really good, who you happen to vibe with. So as a result, there are all these people. Here's a famous example that Sideshow will understand. If only fans from Manchester were fans of Manchester United, they would have fuck all fans. Manchester United won the Premier League like 8 times in 12 years or something. Guess what? They had like 50% of the fans or something crazy. Then when some of these teams got massive like oligarchs and huge owners come in, magically Chelsea went from being a team that was like, you know, probably like the 4th most popular London team to like everyone is suddenly a fan of Chelsea, and everyone from that area magically loves the team, and everyone from other parts of the country suddenly, you know, there's a guy from Liverpool wearing a Chelsea jersey.
Sure,
you know, like,
you see that.
If anything, that moves towards the modern day, though.
I mean, look at the Dallas Cowboys are the same way in the NFL. They're the New York Yankees in baseball. There are teams that have outsized fan bases.
But here's the flaw I see, though. Okay, is if we sell all these spots to geolocation, right? Is it only matters if I have the Cleveland team, if I have the top 3 team in the world. If I have the Cleveland spot and I paid millions, but then I have the equivalent of the worst team in the Premiership, I'm not going to make very much money. I'm not going to have very many fans, you know?
Well, but the
tribalism can't overcome that, in my opinion.
The idea is that at least it would buttress the teams up, because you could say that about esports as it is right now and say, okay, well, this team doesn't have any star players and they suck, so it's not, nobody's going to be a fan of this team. But if you have a team with a city or a region associated with it, you always are going to have at least some baseline of fans, even if you're fucking terrible forever. Taking the Cleveland example, Cleveland Browns are still selling out stadiums, baby, and they're awful, and they've been awful for fucking ever, right?
But here's the problem, okay, is that actually this is where America, again, doesn't have a free market and essentially just imposed like their own equivalent of regulations. Because if you had left a free market approach to franchises in the NFL, for example, or NBA, you would have the most lopsided league in the universe, where there'd be a few places would be making mega bucks, and then there would be a few places like wherever, Milwaukee, Oklahoma, who'd be making, who knows, something, maybe
but that already happens.
But here's the problem. So what they did in the NBA, etc., and NFL is they put in salary caps so that essentially they just made a way so that it was like socialism. Every team gets a star player because we can only afford to play the star player so much. Right?
Well,
is that going to exist in esports?
In that they divide the broadcasting revenue among all the teams, right? Okay. Even though some of the teams have much larger or smaller TV market shares. And these are questions that we need answers to about Overwatch League. Is there going to be a salary cap? Is an incredibly important question. Yeah. Right?
Here's how you solve it.
But here's the problem. Does Blizzard know any of this shit?
Here's how Blizzard can solve it. They just throw in a patch.
From my conversations with Blizzard, they are aware of all of these issues.
No, but that's the thing. I wouldn't pretend, after spending like 50 years looking at certain sports and following all of esports, to say that I could come up with a solution to all these things. They have to do all of this simultaneously, and they have to probably nail it. Otherwise, all they'll do is cycle together $100 million, spunk it all away, and then set esports, at least for Overwatch, dead, and then other esports maybe back 5 years, 10 years.
Definitely possible. Look, what we can say about Overwatch League is that nobody's ever tried to do anything on this scale before in terms of esports. So yes, it could be a colossal failure. That is absolutely true.
No, but that's one of the reasons, to give you context as to why Richard is very skeptical, because the closest we've ever come was CGS.
I mean, I lived through CGS too, Duncan.
No, but the difference is people in CGS had all these great things that they were saying about how they were going to expand and how they were going to build up the leagues and how they were going to do all, and they had all these, but the point is it was all vagary. And when it came down to brass tacks, they blew all the money and then that's it. The problem with that is you only really get one chance to fail when it's that big.
Right.
You don't get like a third chance.
Look, I agree with you, man. I totally agree with you.
So to me, the problem is when you say like, what if, or if it's not what if, they must have a huge source of revenue which can then be split in a quantifiable way to make the person's bid of 2 million worth it. They must have at least some future plan where they've got like an in at some TV network where at least they're planning, in 5 years we'll have you on these channels. They have to have these things. These can't be ifs,
I don't know if they have to have absolutely all of them, but the large majority of them, yes.
Okay.
But yes, look, that's why this has been frustrating for everybody, and that's why we've seen the community outcries, is because this is such an enormous project, and it is dangerous. And look, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be very successful, and indeed it could be groundbreaking and revolutionary, because I think a lot of the way that people are looking at Overwatch League is because American owners, at least, are licking their chops because they want to start carving up the market geographically. That's what professional team owners want, because that's what they're used to. And because I do think that there's value in that. I do think that you can have the existing fan base of esports continue to be exactly as it is right now, even if you add Cleveland in front of the name NRG. But adding that Cleveland and starting to have them actually put down roots in specific places will open up more fans who would not be as hardcore if they did not.
Okay? I have one last thing to say on this topic, though, okay? Did you finish your point there? Did you have something you want to say? Okay.
No.
Right. I've got one last... Yeah?
No. Let me finish. So I think what people are looking at this as is, if you are a major owner, this is the first time that you can enter the esports market if you are a big shot NFL or NBA or baseball owner with a franchise where you're not going to get relegated, which is one thing that every owner that I've talked to from traditional teams has told me when I was speaking to them about League of Legends was a massive fear. And second off, it's the first time they can start to get these markets. And I think the hope is that if they stake their flag in the ground with Overwatch, they're going to be able to hold on to that flag in other titles down the line, whether it's a Blizzard title or any other title, right? They're going to put their roots down. This is my fucking city. So it actually goes beyond Overwatch as well, and well into the future of other titles, even though it's not technically true in that another game could give the LA slot to a different team. I think that if they're able to be successful in Overwatch and develop a large Los Angeles fan base, they will have so much weight in negotiations for further LA slots down the line with other titles, that's going to add a lot of value to the bid now. But again, if this fails and the entire thing collapses and goes up in flames, then obviously, yes, this could set things back quite a long way. So anyway, your point.
So here's my final point on this. I think this is an incredibly crucial one, which no one has addressed on any side of this as far as I can tell, which is I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for esports developers who are like, why is everyone speculating about stuff? Have you ever done interviews? Have you reached out to the community? Have you interacted with the community? No, of course not. I only talk to these huge businesses. Well, that vacuum will be filled by speculation from fans, by expert insiders. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I've never spoken to Blizzard about this. I don't know if they've ever spoken to Richard about it. They haven't done interviews with community sites. They haven't been like, listen, if Blizzard want to set everyone at ease, go in that fucking box where Sideshow is to put up with 20 minutes of this. Me asking, yeah, but what about the Cleveland Steamers? And if you can do that, if you can withstand that fire, that baptism of fire, then we're cooking with gas. Now we start to get a sense of who you are, you know.
I mean, I think that a lot of that's about to come out. And I think maybe there is a possibility that we can get somebody from Blizzard on this show sometime in the future in order to do that.
But Thorin, what if Blizzard already were planning on coming on the show? What if they were going to make a new show that you and me be on? What if they actually are going to make a big site and hire all of you, and then there'll be candy and pie for everyone? And what if we can fly? What if it's just limitations in our own minds that keep us bound to the earth and we can't soar like our dreams? Okay.
Well, yes. Thank you.
Money, come on.
But obviously something's got to happen soon. Some announcement's got to be made soon, right?
Okay.
We're running out of time here. It is now we're almost in the Ides of March, and this thing is supposed to happen in Q3, which is July, August, somewhere in there. Q3 of this year. The time is rapidly approaching, and if they are seriously thinking about doing something at this scale and bringing in all these massive owners, I mean, we're running on a very, very short timeline. So I would imagine we're going to be hearing stuff shortly.
Okay, right. We need to talk about Apex. So I have one last question before we do that. Sideshow, I need to ask you something, okay? Because since Monty doesn't watch the online European tournaments, what do you actually think of the new Rogue lineup? Because this was one where I saw a bunch of people were really excited about the changes they made and thought that they were like, this might be the one that kind of brings all that talent together. What do you make of the new Rogue?
Well, the interesting thing is they actually didn't play in any European online stuff. They played and lost at IM Kiangi, and then the next tournament that they played in, like after they'd kicked out Skipjack and redone their roles, was the Alienware Monthly Melee February edition in North America. So I only got to catch a couple of games watching them there. They look fairly well coordinated. It seems like a good style that works for them, but it's so difficult to get a read on them because they're not even playing against the best of the North American competition. They're playing against the Tier 2 North American competition that, while they've looked fairly good, is existing in its own vacuum, and it's difficult to draw comparisons. They have brought in Nico and switched Wins over to a position where he is less affected by his shallow hero pool. That's probably going to allow them to play a larger array of styles as well than they were able to play at IM Kiangi. Overall, it still seems like a really weird swap for me in terms of the people that they have on the roster compared to their previous roster and compared to Misfits' previous roster. Yeah. They don't seem as well-rounded as those other teams were, and I think they're going to be another team that is good at one particular style but isn't going to be able to branch out, and triple DPS is such a niche strategy that it doesn't work on all map types. It doesn't work in all situations. It's got no finishing power. It's really it's going to be a big test for them when the other teams come back that can actually go toe-to-toe with them on an individual level.
Okay. Right, so let's talk about Apex then, because obviously now, when we did the last show, it was the final games of the group stage. So let's just quickly go over some of that. So we had Bishop on, Monty, and he was telling us all these great things about Cloud9, and they were going against Kongduansia, and it actually was pretty competitive.
Yes.
Tell me more.
It was very competitive. I think that we saw a lot of development from C9, and finally they had switched over to more rigid roles, which I think helped define their style a lot more when we saw them play in the game. Bringing Mendo over into the Zarya role seemed to they were switching around a lot before without significant identity. Now, part of this, I think, has to say that Kongduansia simply hasn't looked very good in their last several matches, which is also part of it. They have been on a relative decline, whereas C9 has been on the up and up. But for once, we got to see more teamwork out of Cloud9 in addition to the mechanical skill that they've had.
What do you think of Cloud9, Sideshow?
I'm really interested in what Bishop can do with the team. They have a lot of talent on the team that also has really deep hero pools. Shofo, Mendo, Kasai, Gods. They can all play DPS heroes to a high degree. They can all play the off tanks as well, so it gives them a huge variation in what they can actually bring to the table. But I think it might have been something to do with when they lost Kai. They seemed to lose a sense of what they wanted to do with the team. I think they were a little bit lost there, so that should be something that Bishop can add to them. I was talking to him, I just did an interview with him actually, and he said that...
Yeah, I read it. It was quite good. People should read it. Where could they find it?
That's over.gg, and it's up on there. And he said that he was a little bit disappointed with their performance in that game, actually, despite it being, from the outside perspective, a huge improvement in Cloud9's form over the previous game where they lost to AF Blue. But I think he had it in his head that he had seen so much improvement from his team, and he knew exactly how Kongdu Uncia played, that he thought, I'm literally a spy from the other side. We should be able to take this series. And to be fair, they almost did. But what you've got to think about that is perhaps they were playing better against Kongdu because he's from Kongdu as well. We might not see the same performance when they play against other teams. But in general, I think this should be a big improvement from Cloud9. They always had the pieces, and now I think they're going to have some a much better idea of how to put that together.
Okay. So Monty, as you kind of alluded to, if Kongdu Uncia had continued on into the next group and shown that, they were like a strong contender, that might have meant more, but does the fact that they then lost to RunAway kind of make that not as impressive anymore?
I was reading I was reading Sideshow's rankings, where RunAway was put on his top rankings for this week, and I think what he was saying in his ranking of RunAway is quite true, in that they were very hard to read because of all the roster changes and because of their wildly inconsistent performance, where they would get absolutely slammed by Kongdu Panthera and then come back and destroy Fnatic and swapping their roster up the entire time. But what we've seen actually is RunAway has gelled together really quickly, especially because Cox was playing a flex DPS role and is now basically just playing Ana. It's actually remarkable how quickly he has taken to that particular role. And then when they have a DPS pair as strong as Haksal and Stitch, who have been able to hang together with the best of them, and I think we have to say Haksal may be the best Genji player in Korea after that performance that he had when they played against Lunatic-Hai. This is a very dangerous team, and they've also shown that they can play a pretty good number of strategies. Now, is Haksal mostly on the Genji? Yeah, but he can go out on the Roadhog sometimes. He can go out in the Mei. He can do some other stuff, and and also the other factor that I want to bring up about RunAway's performance has been that Kaiser has been absolutely destroying people, and his timing on engages with Winston is very good. His mind games with Earthshatter, he's been winning against very good tank players like Panker and Miro. So he's peaking at the right time too, for sure, with this particular roster. And I think RunAway has been a surprise that they have been this strong, and I'm excited to see more of them down the line. So they have definitely surpassed all expectations by a huge degree with that win over Lunatic-Hai.
After the game where they beat Kongdu Uncia and then beat Lunatic-Hai, I thought, right, I've got to go back and watch this game where they got slammed by Kongdu Panthera. Obviously, I've watched it before, but I need to look back with the benefit of hindsight and go, what was happening here for them just to get crushed in this game and then go on to beat what I had pinned as the best team in Korea in Lunatic-Hai. And I went back and they were playing a completely different style. I don't know whether this was something that they'd consciously done after this game against Kongdu Panthera, but they were playing the majority of their game against Kongdu Panthera, just trying to go triple tank v triple tank, with Haksal playing Zarya most of the time. And they were just trying to go head to head with Kongdu Panthera and getting dominated whenever they were on attack and Panthera on defense. And they were playing, interestingly, when I watched the game against the Lunatic-Hai as well, they were using the same defense on Numbani that Kongdu Panthera had obliterated them with, where you put your support over onto the Torbjorn, and then you've got a really good defense against any kind of dive composition, and then you can add like a Winston into that to be able to contest the high grounds whenever people get up there, and then you've got a very tanky lineup as well. So I think RunAway at some point after this game against Kongdu Panthera have got it into their heads that they just need to move away from trying to go triple tank v triple tank and work on actually their strength, which has always been supporting Haksal as this real carry Genji for his team, and going forwards with him in the dive compositions and trying to pick apart, either play better than the other teams in the dive comps as we saw in the Lunatic-Hai game, or to pick apart the slightly less coordinated triple tank teams like Kongdu Uncia, who, although previously were known for their coordination, have started slipping this.
And that's a big part of it too with Kongdu, is that it hasn't been because when we look at the early Kongdu and CF, we look at their first couple of matches from Apex, they were methodical in the way that they were approaching objectives, and that was basically entirely on them. Sure, you can run disruption, but we just don't see the same kind of extensive flanks or intricate plays anymore that we saw from Kongdu previously, and that's the fault of their own decision making at a certain point in time. They simply are not approaching objectives the same way. Moreover, their ult efficiency is also just tanked. Now they're wasting a lot of ultimates, overlapping them, using too much, when before they would be very disciplined, only using one or two as necessary. So that's part of, I think, Kongdu Onzia's particular fall. But I do agree with you about RunAway, and I think that now, and for the most part over the season, they have been running 2-2-2 compositions and unlocking the potential of their star DPS players and allowing them to shine better than we may have seen when they played against Kongdu Panthera. Also, different roster, so replacing the Ana player did make a big difference. Bringing Bumper back in when he had played previously in the qualification series has made a big difference as well.
Okay, but I mean, coming into this second group stage, most people would have said, okay, so the tier one like contenders, yeah, you've got obviously Lunatic-Hai, you've got probably Kongdu Panthera, I think reasonable to say LW Blue maybe still up there, but no one would have had RunAway this high up. So do these results actually indicate, like, is it more of a free-for-all in Apex now? What's your sense of how the teams are going to shape out?
Well, nobody could have really rated them this high because of all the roster swaps, and we didn't even know what that was going to look like in the booth when they actually got on stage and how they were going to perform. So as of right now, you can't say it was a fluke. They beat both Uncia and Lunatic-Hai. It's not that these guys are fluking their way into the semifinals. They are to be taken seriously at this stage, I think, for sure. Okay.
So what do you think about the last game in Group A, which is going to be the decider between Lunatic-Hai and Kongdu Uncia? Sideshow, who do you have winning this one?
I think Lunatic-Hai should pretty much run away with this one. Kongdu Uncia have looked... I don't know quite what has happened to their coordination. They brought in Butcher on the off-tank, which added a lot more individual talent to their off-tank role and gave their tanks a bit more punch. But like Monty was saying, they used to have such a set style. You could see them approaching each area where the defending team was holding, and they would have their ults and they would know what to do, and it would be synchronized between their team, and they would have a plan and they would execute it, and it would either work or it would fail, and most of the time it worked. And now
they would have
playing
pincer attacks, flanking around two sides at the same time, setting up, distracting them while Birdring rather would ult them with Soldier. They had such great tactics, and where the fuck has that gone?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know.
It's so strange.
I mean, you could call it one of the problems with Overwatch in general, right? Is because there's so few games that actually get played. It's difficult to distinguish between runs of form and actual slips in terms of where teams are actually at. So I'm not really sure how to read this from Uncia. They might have just had some bad games towards the end of the season, but I get the feeling that this is actually more indicative of how they're going to be playing in the future, and their early really strong form where they looked super clinical against AF Blue was probably just because they were styling on AF Blue, and they've just got the talent to be able to do that. So I would be incredibly surprised, actually, given what we've seen over the past week, if they're able to win against Lunatic-Hai.
Does Lunatic-Hai's loss actually sap any of the hype that they will win this season of Apex? Can't they just bounce back?
I don't think they're going to win. I don't think they're going to win. I don't think they have the strategic depth to win, and I think that as of right now, Eska is too much of a hindrance on the team. It's forcing them to play strategies. Lunatic-Hai, we know them as a dive team, but they actually do not play Tracer or matching dive DPS as much as people think that they do. They play Mei a lot of the time. They play Soldier. They play McCree. They play Eska heroes, but he's sort of just off on his own, plinking away at the front line from the back, And his aim also, his mechanical form doesn't appear to be very good right now. I've been impressed with some of his decision making on Mei, but as a whole, their dive is not as divey as other teams like RunAway can throw out there. Certainly he can play the Tracer, but he can't play the Tracer at the same level as other Tracer players that remain in the tournament like Stitch. And beyond that, like I don't really know where they go from here. They don't have enough of a secondary DPS strength to make it. I think they can make top 4. They're still a very good team, but I don't think they can make the finals in the state that they are in right now.
Here's the thing, though. I actually agree with your analysis almost completely, but the way that this playoff bracket has turned out, you've got both of the teams that enjoy playing dive are probably going to come out of Group A, and both of the teams that play the tank-heavy style or Meta Athenas, if they make a breakthrough into the top 2 from Group B, are going to be over there. And I have the feeling that RunAway could get upset by one of those teams from Group B when they meet in the semi-finals, whereas I think Lunatic-Hai have a better chance of being able to progress. They've kind of shown it before.
Here's what I think is going to happen. I think LW Blue is going to take first place in Group B, and I think LW Blue will beat Lunatic-Hai in the semifinals. I think LW Blue has just ridiculous breadth of strategies that they can throw at you, and I don't think they're going to be fooled a second time by Lunatic-Hai. I think that they may have lost in the group stages, but they're going to come out stronger, and they're going to have way more team compositions that they can run than Lunatic-Hai, and they're going to come out with a better solution.
Yeah, they might well do. They were playing a lot of like counter dive when they actually played in the group stages and didn't seem to be able to play it.
They can dive too. They can definitely play dive, right? We think about guys like Flower. His Tracer is definitely way up there. I think that we are going to see a very different style of matchup if the semifinal occurs than what we saw in the group stages. So while I agree with you, if they under the circumstances that they face Meta Athena or that they face Kongnu Panthera, I agree with you, but not under the circumstance where they face LW Blue.
I think it's an awesome series of season of Apex either way. Like as soon as they got into the playoff groups, honestly, the group stage was fairly boring because in most groups you just had like some clear dominant teams, and a lot of the games were kind of blowouts, but there were some gems in there. But this playoff group stage, just from beginning to end into the finals, I think is just going to be insane.
I really like the format. Having the quarterfinals the way they are this time around makes a lot of sense to me. So,
Well, as one of the presidents of your country said, Monty, you can't get fooled again. I believe he was referencing a saying in Texas, possibly Tennessee. He didn't know. And look that clip up if you want. It's a good little Easter egg there, a little throwback over 10 years there. So, okay, so in Group B, this is the one where we haven't had any of the matches whatsoever yet. So obviously the marquee matchup is Kongnu Panthera playing LW Blue. So we'll get a very good sense early on of how good these two teams are. What do you think of this matchup, Sideshow? Are you a believer in Panthera?
Panthera have looked really strong, particularly on defense. They're a really solid team, and they absolutely slam Fnatic. They beat RunAway, dismissed them on 2 of the maps as well. And stylistically, they seem to have a very good answer to a lot of the weaker dive teams, and they seem to be able to outplay teams when they try and go triple tank. They can play the 2-2-2, and they also go over to triple tank when they just want to push, and they have interesting defensive strategies. But LW Blue, it kind of comes down to how well they have worked on their attack, in my opinion, because I think that for me is going to be the big deciding factor, is whether LW Blue's attack, where I think they're probably going to use Flower on the Genji and Sebeobi on like a hit scan guy Tracer to get in behind them and just maybe play like a classic dive composition. But I'm still not sold on whether that's actually going to be enough on hybrid and what are they called, assault maps to break through Panthera. They have seemed like the only team from watching Apex that has a good enough defense to be able to beat the top dive teams when they just try and create chaos. So it really is a big unknown for me, but I think that's going to be the point that I'm most interested in, is seeing how well the Panthera defense holds up against Blue's dive, because I think that's probably how the game's going to go.
Definitely good. Okay. I mean, I think that's all the matchups, like you were saying, are going to be really excellent, and I'm looking forward to the start of that next week. Group B, I hope Africa Blue does something. I'm not expecting much from them, but beyond the first couple of matches, we should get some very good ones.
Set fire to Arhan and just push him off in the Viking ship. Goodbye, sweet
I don't know what's going on.
No, but here's the thing, Monty. This is what happens now. Okay, so you've talked so much shit on Lord Arhan. You've essentially implied he shouldn't even be given any focus to his own team. He should have to just stand down, bend the knee, is essentially your message to him. But here's the problem, Monty. This is where, Africa Blue, okay, I'm going to say it already, they can't get out of this group. There's no chance they are. But what they could do is completely ruin all the hype of Meta Athena and just make it totally depressing that, the two teams that get out, it's Kongdu Panthera and LW Blue. And the whole dream that Meta Athena were this, team that was going to come up out of nowhere and they were all going to get to the top together and they were going to do it around this great player. The style's going to... It'll just all be deflated by shitty Africa Blue. How do you like that?
I would like to see a Royal Road. We haven't had one of those in a while. We never actually got one in League of Legends because it's so hard to have that in team games, where obviously most of the players will have been playing in the league previously. Yeah. But would be entertaining to have that run. But I'm not married to it. If Africa Blue and Arhan want to come out and show me, then that's great. I have a feeling, though, that Arhan and Esk are going to jump me and break my kneecaps in the studio. So.
Okay, well, at least they'll do something. So, okay, Sideshow. Do you believe Meta Athena?
At least they'll have done damage to somebody, right?
Do some damage. They'll have a quality setup there. Do you think Meta Athena can do anything in this group?
Not in this group. I think I saw the hype around Meta Athena. I think it was Volumel that wrote an article about how he thinks this is the Royal Road, like you were saying, for them coming into the playoffs. Watching their games in Group A, they have a style that they particularly want to play around, but I think it's a style that is far more easily countered than the other teams that have an identity to their team. The problem with the Meta Athena approach when you're going to be playing against teams that are the level of Kongdu Panthera and Luxury Watch Blue is that not only do they have the ability to try and cut off the front line from the back line and properly dive into them, which you haven't seen.
May is really good against Hoon. He plays too far forward.
Yeah, he's but also even if you play a dive against them, they haven't had to come up with they haven't had to face that in Group A. They haven't had to face a good team that can actually dive. The best team that was in there was Envy. They don't have a Genji, they don't have a Tracer, they don't have people who get behind and try and cut off Hoon from the resources that he provides to the rest of his team. I don't think. I mean, I could be completely wrong. This might turn out to be one of those things where you just look it up afterwards. You're like, what on earth are you talking about? But I genuinely don't think that Meta Athena are going anywhere in this group. I think they're going to get pretty solidly taken apart by Panthera and LW Blue, actually.
I think that the one X factor that you have to consider with Meta Athena is that when push has come to shove, yes, they like to play with the Zarya focused play style, but when push has come to shove, Libero has actually shown that he is a pretty incredible player, and he has a huge hero pool available to him. And if we look at the way Meta Athena has approached, say, the double sniper attack on King's Row, or we've seen Libero play great Hanzo games in the past, there is and he's also a wonderful diva player. There's a flexibility to this roster that means that I know they can, in theory, play other strategies, as in they have the resources available to them to do so. So have they worked on that will be the question. Now, if we see the same thing, then I'm inclined to agree with you, but I'm not going to go out because I think that on an individual level, they have enough talent to be able to do other things.
Yeah, when you see them play, although they have I guess in a sense it's a bit like NIP. Like they have the ability. You can see the players flexing onto different things where you think that they could play different styles. But even when they play the 2-2-2 with Libero on like a counter DPS where he plays a DPS and he picks his hero in order to go directly against the enemy team instead of like picking something that supports his own team. They still play this aggressive frontline style where he's either sniping from the back or whatever. It's not like they then put their resources onto the DPS players. So I don't know. For me, even if what Envy were trying to do when they were just trying to go toe to toe with the front line and they had, was it Harry Hook playing Reaper then? That actually almost took Ilios from Meta Athena as well. So I think that there are a lot more things that you can do against the Meta Athena style that you can't bring out against some of the dive compositions or the triple tanks that people use. The fact that they put Hoon in these positions where he's playing really far forwards and using his bubbles to generate the energy and do the damage and get the nano boost.
That's why I was saying Mei is so
strong. Yeah. But then again, that weakness comes down to the fact of whether these other Korean teams, Panthera and LW Blue, are going to be able to read that and make the adjustments to counter it. Because if they
Panthera loves Mei, so if any team is going to be able to do that, they can. Like Panthera loves running triple tank Mei. Now, typically they do it on defense of assault maps or hybrid maps, but they are perfectly capable of playing that style of play and that style of composition.
Yeah, I think even like if you were playing a Mei Reaper composition would be good against them as well, particularly when you're playing on defense. Like the same thing, like you're isolating tanks and then you're shredding them, but it's going to work with other compositions as well because you've still got the damage in a lot of the tanks when you're playing with these compositions. Like the Roadhog obviously does a ton of damage. Zarya still does a ton of damage if you've got your energy. So I see a couple of. They're not so much flaws in the game in Meta Athena's playstyle as they are exploitable counters that don't seem to exist as much for other teams.
True.
Okay, so all things considered, all the 8 teams remaining. Well, I mean, one of them's already out, but you know what I mean. Which team is actually your pick, Sideshow, to win Apex? Who would you take at this juncture?
I don't know. RunAway potentially could do it, but I honestly think that Panthera are going to be the team to come out on top. I think, yeah, I'm going to go with Panthera because the dive composition is incredibly strong. And theoretically, if you pick out the right people in any composition, like the way the Panthera play on the defense, they're essentially all structuring themselves around the Ana, but they're so good at being able to defend their Ana player that and he's actually really good as well, Luffy, that they're able to negate that, I think. So although we haven't really seen these teams tested against each other's styles, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think it's going to be Panthera that take it, assuming they're able to get the better of Luxury Watch Blue, who are also real top contenders.
And Monty, you're taking LW Blue? Okay.
I am. I think that we've seen great dive compositions from LW Blue. We've seen them use Zenyatta and have Luna on the Zenyatta and use Orb of Discord particularly well. And I think LW Blue is one of their greatest strengths is their target selection and their target calling and their ability to immediately focus down players. And beyond that, they can do so many various styles of composition. They're not locked into a dive or a sort of awkward half dive. We've seen Flower be wonderful on a variety of both hit scan and projectile DPS. ABLB is obviously a top tier tracer player. And I think Kongdu Panthera will have circles run around them because they are a little bit more tanky in their compositions overall. And I think that they will be surprised by the harassment and damage that LW Blue is going to cause to them.
The thing is, though, as well, if RunAway win a semi-final against either of those teams, they could very easily go on to win the final. Because I think the style that they'll be playing against the other team could well just work exactly the same. And they've been looking really hot recently. And the way that Stitch is working along with their like Haxal heavy style, but they also have the ability to switch it up, and instead of playing that, they play like a slightly more defensive style. I can't quite remember exactly the composition that they were playing, but I remember being impressed by it anyway. So I think if they're able to take a semi-final convincingly, they could just do the whole thing, and that for me would be amazing, because this team has just come out of seemingly nowhere.
Okay. Right. We never have any final statements to make, because the aim of our lives and careers is to never actually stop talking, is to always have the final word at all junctures in life. So we don't need to say anything to end the show. But Sideshow, do you have any parting words for the audience, those plebs that are watching now?
No, I have no parting words. I'm going to go with you.